Chapter 43:12. Now that he had suddenly relapsed, Lisa was at a loss. How did this happen? Gong Fan leaned against the sofa and curled up. His breathing became more rapid and his shoulders trembled violently. Lisa's heart ached, but she didn't know what to do. What should we do? Lisa immediately rummaged through the cabinets and started looking for the paper bag. Gong Fan had used up all his energy just to maintain the balance of his breathing. Lisa couldn't find the paper bag no matter how hard she searched. However, she was still calm. She rushed to Alice's room and knocked hard on the door. Alice, Gong Fan is having a relapse. Wake up. Alice wasn't in a deep sleep. She was woken up and rushed out of the room. Just as she reached the door, she heard rapid breathing coming from the sofa. She immediately realized that something was wrong. She turned around and returned to the room. She immediately took out the paper bag from her bag. Because of Gong Fan's health, the paper bag was always prepared. Although Yu's health was already very stable, Alice still prepared these necessities just in case. She took the paper bag and walked to Gong Fan's side. She stuffed the paper bag into his hand. Grab him. Do you know the method I taught you? Gong Fan trembled as he grabbed the paper bag and aimed the mouth of the bag at his nose. I've had respiratory syndrome. The patient would breathe faster and shallower due to excessive anxiety, pain, fever, crying, and other situations, causing respiratory alkalosis, which was hypocapnia caused by excessive carbon dioxide excretion. It could be shown as dizziness, numbness in the hands and feet, and around the mouth. By using the paper bag, it formed a dead space for the respiratory tract, which helped to restore the concentration of carbon dioxide. This was a simple and effective method. With Alice's help, Gong Fan used the paper bag and tried his best to adjust his breathing. Take a deep breath. Gong Fan took a deep breath. The paper bag shrank rapidly as the air flowed out. Breathe, exhale. Gong Fan slowly exhaled the turbid air from his mouth and nose. His rapid breathing gradually cooled down. Gong Fan tightened his mouth and his breathing became slower and slower. Alice heaved a sigh of relief. Lisa asked with a strange expression, "Why did he suddenly fall ill again?" I thought that he had completely recovered from his respiratory syndrome. This kind of illness is mostly caused by mental and psychological problems. In addition, his lungs and heart aren't as healthy as ordinary people, so it's easy for him to relapse. It can be triggered by any reason, and there is no such thing as complete recovery. Lisa nodded as if she understood. Then, you must be more careful in the future. It's better to have these things ready at all times. Yes. What would happen if there was no paper bag? Alice raised her eyebrows and replied, Didn't I say before that if it's serious it might cause shock? Lisa shuddered. It was no wonder that Yun Shirsher would always carry a few paper bags with her at all times, even if she didn't carry any cosmetics or makeup powder in her bag. So this was the reason. She even felt that Yun Shirsher was too cautious. Little did she know that Yun Shirsher's concern for Gong Fan was meticulous and meticulous. Chapter 43:13. Gong Fan, how do you feel? Are you feeling better? Gong Fan nodded and pursed his lips. I'm fine. Alice held his wrist and turned it up to check his pulse. His heart rate was still at a relatively fast level. What's going on? Alice also felt that it was a little strange. Although it could be triggered by anything, this relapse was too sudden. Even he was a little caught off guard. Gong Fan calmed down and shook his head. I don't know why either. It's just that I feel my heart palpitate for no reason. While I'm half awake, subconsciously, my breathing suddenly quickened. Did you have a nightmare? Gong Fan was startled and was a little suspicious. How did you know? Why would I feel my heart palpitate for no reason? Gong Fan lowered his eyes in desolation. He leaned against the sofa dejectedly and said sadly, Am I a burden to you? Alice was stunned. Humans were all afraid of death. No matter who it was, they would always be filled with fear at the moment before death. Even someone as strong as Gong Fan would fear death one day. To the alternate personality, the day it was exiled was the day it completely disappeared. Alice took a deep breath. I will protect you. Why? Why do I exist as such a life form? Gong Fan sighed in his heart. Humans were really a mysterious and complicated existence. When Lisa heard this, she couldn't take it anymore. She said nervously, Is there really no other way? There are two personalities. Do we have to get rid of one? Yu. Isn't Yu also willing to accept Gong Fan? Why are the two personalities conflicting with each other? Alice frowned and was a little hesitant. Lisa continued, now, Yu and Gong Fan's personalities are clearly getting along harmoniously. They can get along harmoniously. They have the habit of keeping diaries. No matter what happens today, they will record it in their diaries. No matter who woke up that day, they would be able to understand what had happened that day through the diary. Wasn't that a good thing? Why must you make such a cruel decision? Alice sighed. There's one thing I might have forgotten to mention. What? Dual personality disorder and multiple personality disorder don't actually have much of a boundary. Let me give you an example. In Yu's world, there are two palaces. Only the main personality lives in one palace, and no one knows how many personalities live in the other palace. Do you understand? Lisa didn't quite understand. She didn't say anything and continued to listen to her. Alice continued, now because of Gong Fan's existence, the door has been opened. Then, because of his existence, won't this open door never be closed? Since the door is open, other personalities will come out one after another. Sometimes, these personalities won't come out at all. Sometimes, these personalities will swarm out. When Lisa heard this, she could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Chapter 43:14. Lisa frowned and suggested an idea. If that's the case, what if Yu and Gong Fan work together to close this door? Then, Gong Fan and Yu could live in the same palace. Wouldn't that work? Alice pondered and said, I suspect that Gong Fan used to live in Yu's palace. Hence, the two personalities merged together and there was no obvious difference. This kind of illness was too complicated. A person's mental illness was far more difficult to control than a physical illness. A person's physical illness could be seen and could be cured through surgery. However, mental illness could not be cured. Hence, in the field of mental illness, hypnosis was definitely the best treatment method. Then the problem is how to close this door. Alice stood up and glanced at Gong Fan. She said hesitantly, do you know what I suspect the most now? What? I suspect that Professor Romanka created Natalia's second personality through hypnosis. Then, he sent Natalia to Yu's side and the second Natalia, through hypnosis, created a third personality in Yu to complete the purpose of his experiment. Lisa was suspicious. Does Romanka know about Yu's illness? Yes. Alice said, I consulted him about Yu's illness before. He was very interested and suggested that he wanted to do the experiment on Yu. I did not agree. You mean? Lisa quickly understood what Alice was trying to say. Actually, Romanka deliberately sent Natalia to Yu's side so that it would be easier for him to carry out his plan. Rather than calling it a plan, it was better to call it a conspiracy. That's what I suspect. Gong Fan was silent. Just thinking about it in detail was enough to make one terrified. Indeed, after experiencing Natalia's hypnosis, his body had undergone earth-shaking changes. Then what should we do now? When we return to Hurricane, I will invite Romanka over. Lisa was surprised. Isn't that the same as letting a wolf into the house? How could that be? If a hurricane comes, then it's my territory. What kind of storm can he stir up? When Lisa heard this, she was still a little worried. Professor Romanka always gives me the feeling that he is a cunning old man. He was once an authority in psychology and a senior professor of multiple personality disorder. When I interacted with him before, I had to be careful when I spoke to him. Gong Jie passed through a grill and entered another part of the cabin. The entire private jet was divided into two cabins. The other cabin had the same structure as the main airport he was in. By then, Hua Jin had already put Natalia to sleep. Hua Jin, on the other hand, had drunk some coffee in the afternoon, so he wasn't sleepy and was drinking tea in the living room. When Gong Jie walked in just now, he caught a glimpse of Gong Jie from the corner of his eye and immediately felt nervous. Why are you here? Can't I be here? Gong Jie sat up on the sofa and crossed his legs elegantly. Hua Jin looked even more uneasy. He put down the teacup and looked at Meng Chao. It's so late. Aren't you sleeping? I can't sleep. Chapter 43:15. Hua Jin stood up, poured a cup of brewed tea, and handed it to him. Gong Fan took it and asked curiously, what tea is this? I don't know. I only saw this box on the wine cabinet. Da Hong Pao. Gong Jie only remembered that there were Da Hong Pao and Taiping Hokue on the plane. That was to be used when receiving VIPs. Da Hong Pao? When Hua Jin heard this, he was very curious. Is this real Da Hong Pao or fake Da Hong Pao? The reason why he asked this was not because he doubted Gong Jie, but because Da Hong Pao was really a noble tea. It was extremely rare. Da Hong Pao was produced in Fujian's Wui Mountain. It was an oolong tea of excellent quality. It was a special tea in China. There were very few Da Hong Pao in history, and the only Da Hong Pao that was recognized were the few on the walls of the Nine Dragons' Nest. Because the Da Hong Pao tea trees grew on cliffs where no one could climb, the monks of the temple would use fruits as bait to train monkeys to pick the tea leaves. Therefore, some people called it monkey-picking tea. It was also because of this that the production was very low. The Da Hong Pao tea trees were 10 feet tall, and the leaves were as big as palms. They grew on cliffs, and when the wind blew, the leaves fell. The monks of the temple collected them to make tea, which could cure all kinds of diseases. At its best, the production of tea leaves was only a few hundred grams. A few hundred grams was less than a caddy. Most of them were supplied internally by people in positions of power, and the Da Hong Pao on the market was not considered pure Da Hong Pao. No wonder he only saw a little of it. He thought that it was the residue of Gong Jie drinking it, so he soaked it all. No wonder the smell was so strong. When he thought of this, Hua Jin suddenly felt uneasy. Da Hong Pao was so rare. God, it was Da Hong Pao. If it was the real deal, then wouldn't he be wasting God's gift recklessly? Do you think I would drink fake tea leaves? No. No. Dozens of grams of tea leaves were all brewed by him. Rounding it up, he felt as if he had drunk 100 million yuan. It's too strong. Gong Jie muttered and asked casually, "Don't tell me you soaked all of it?" Hua Jin blushed with guilt. He replied awkwardly. "I thought it was just ordinary tea leaves." Gong Jie's face darkened. "You think my tea leaves are ordinary?" "No, that's not what I meant." Hua Jin lowered his head and said guiltily, "At most, I'll compensate you. I bought these tea leaves from an auction. 50 grams. 5 million. You'll pay for it?" Hua Jin's breath was stuck in his throat, making it even more difficult for him to breathe. However, he didn't want Gong Jie to look down on him. He braced himself and said, "I'll pay for it. It's not like I can't afford it." After being in the entertainment industry for so many years, it wouldn't be right to say that he didn't have any family background. Although 5 million wasn't a sky-high price, 5 million for just a few dozen grams of tea leaves really made his heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys ache. Hua Jin bargained. 5 million. I'll pay you 2. 5 million. Why is it 2? 5 million? Gong Jie didn't understand. Hua Jin pursed his lips and glanced at the teacup in Gong Jie's hand. "Didn't you drink it too? The drinker gets a share. Is that how you calculate it?" Gong Jie said unhappily, "You've soaked such good tea leaves in one go. The essence is gone, and you still have the nerve to say that the drinker gets a share?" Hua Jin felt even more guilty. He muttered to himself, but he couldn't hear what he was muttering. How painful. Chapter 43:16. When Gong Jie saw him sitting on pins and needles, he suddenly found it funny. The anger in his heart was also swept away. Hua Jin felt very uneasy. He actually drank such precious tea in one go. He suddenly felt a little guilty. When Gong Jie saw this, he snorted. "Forget it. I don't like Da Hong Pao. I like to drink green tea." "Then, what's the tea beside Da Hong Pao?" Hua Jin asked. "Taiping Hokue." "Hokue." Gong Jie raised his eyebrows and glanced at him meaningfully. "Why? Are you still coveting my Hokue?" No. How would he dare to? Just drinking a pot of Da Hong Pao was enough to make him bankrupt. If he drank another pot of Hokue, wouldn't he be emptied of all his savings? Corrupt. It's really too corrupt. Hua Jin thought to himself. In this world, the gap between the rich and the poor was really too big. Some people were born with a silver spoon in their mouths. When they were born, they were destined to be the cream of the crop. Some people, on the other hand, had lived for most of their lives and did not understand even a little bit of what life was like. 5 million to Gong Jie might be a pot of tea, but to an ordinary family, It might be an income that they would not be able to earn in their lifetime. It's not fair. Hua Jin also felt a little unbalanced. Although his voice was very low, Gong Jie heard it clearly. What's not fair? Hua Jin said frankly. Look, this pot of tea of yours is equivalent to an ordinary family's lifetime savings. In other words, an ordinary person who works hard for a lifetime may not even be able to afford this pot of tea of yours. When Gong Jie heard this, he smiled. How is it not fair? I think it's very fair. Why? That's because we were born different. Gong Jie's tone was not arrogant at all. It was a calm narration that could not be any calmer. When Hua Jin heard this, he did not dare to agree. How is it fair? If you judge things according to your logic, then everyone's life is very unfair. Some people are born with broken limbs, while others are born healthy and intelligent. Can you say that those who are healthy and intelligent are at fault? Hua Jin was speechless and finally shook his head silently. In that case, why is it unfair for some people to be born rich while others are born poor and remain poor for their entire lives? Hua Jin was actually unable to come up with an answer to such a change in conditions. In other words, if a person who was born with a disability walks on the road, according to your thinking, you will definitely think that he is the person in the world who was treated the most unfairly by fate. Then, I still feel that fate is unfair to me. Why? Hua Jin was a little confused. What else do you think is unfair? You live in a big villa and have your own private jet. To you, money is just a string of numbers in your bank account. You are blessed with good looks and will never know the taste of poverty. You probably can't even understand that some people can't live a stable life, right? You are the elite standing at the top of the pyramid in this world. You will never know how the people at the bottom of the pyramid live. Chapter 43:17. Gong Jie's expression froze when he heard that. His gaze turned cold as it slowly landed on Hua Jin. He gently put down the teacup in his hand. Hua Jin also realized that his words were too extreme. He bit his lips, not knowing how to explain. Gong Jie placed the teacup on the table and smiled. You're wrong. Ha! On the contrary, I've seen more of such deviations than you. Gong Jie looked up and stared at him. In southern Fei, I've seen extravagant aristocrats who drove luxury cars worth millions and lived in mansions worth tens of millions. The slums that were separated from the wealthy district by a street never had a single light on at night. In Felvben, I've seen children who had just turned 6 years old follow their siblings and jump into dirty gutters. Even if they accidentally choked on a few mouthfuls of dirty water filled with hundreds of millions of bacteria, they would still try their best to scoop up a few plastic bottles to survive. To them, the most extravagant and luxurious meal was the leftovers of ordinary people that were on the verge of rotting. I've also seen refugees living in the flames of war, using their blood as the price to support a bunch of corrupt regimes. Yes, you're right. Fate is very unfair, but this is the true face of fate. It's very funny, but ordinary people don't dare to laugh at it. Hua Jin was stunned. Do you know what fate is? Gong Jie smiled. You can't get what you want, but you don't get what you want. Do you think those rich children are all enjoying life when they're born? Yes, they're enjoying life, but at the same time, they're also enduring it. Enjoying things that ordinary people couldn't even dream of, and enduring things that ordinary people didn't dare to endure. Gong Jie was destined to live an extraordinary life from the moment he was born. After returning to the Gong family, Gong Shaoying appreciated him and he began to stand out. His extraordinary talent gave him an irreplaceable place in the Gong family. However, with his talent, even if he did not return to the Gong family, he would not be buried. A strong and outstanding seed, if casually thrown into the dust, would quietly break through the soil and bloom into a beautiful flower. Just like Yu. His childhood environment was so ordinary that it could not be any more ordinary. However, Yu was destined to lead an extraordinary life. Yes, fate was such a funny thing. But ordinary people didn't dare to laugh at him. Since you've got it, cherish it. After Gong Jie finished speaking, Hua Jin was still stunned for a long time. He didn't expect Gong Jie to say something so philosophical. Thinking about it, one could understand the meaning behind it. I'm sorry, Hua Jin sighed. I was too extreme. It's not a matter of being extreme or not. The man chuckled. It's just that you can't blame yourself for what you've gotten. Who doesn't have shackles? If that's the case, it's better. Hua Jin could not help but laugh bitterly when he heard that. It's hard to imagine that you're the one who said these words. Gong Jie glanced at him with a hint of self-mockery in his handsome eyes. If possible, I hope that my life will be more ordinary. How ordinary do you want it to be? Gong Jie's life was destined to be extraordinary. Hua Jin held his chin in puzzlement. If a person is too ordinary, it'll be very tiring. How do you imagine an ordinary life to be? It's good to be like you. Chapter 43:18. When Hua Jin heard that, he suddenly laughed. For an ordinary person like me, my life is already very extraordinary. But for young Master Gong, well, I'm indeed very ordinary. I have a stable job, an average-sized house, a car, and an ordinary family. At the very least, I don't want to be too deeply exposed to the cruelty of this world. Gong Jie smiled arrogantly. Even if I'm not Gong Jie, I'm destined to be extraordinary. Perhaps I won't lose to Mu Yaja. That's not necessarily true. Everything you have now besides yourself, a part of it is given to you by the Gong family. That's true. Gong Jie sneered. For Mu Yaja, a part of what he has comes from the Mu family, right? Hua Jin felt awkward. That's true too. I won't lose to him. Gong Jie was obviously not convinced by his brother-in-law, Mu Yaja. Hua Jin scratched his cheek with his fingers and teased. Seems like there's a strong smell of gunpowder in the air. I saw that both of you were getting along so harmoniously that I thought both of you would be able to coexist peacefully. Coexist peacefully? Maybe in our next life. Gong Jie did not buy Mu Yaja's words at all. If it were not for Yun Shishir, the two of them might have been destined to be enemies for life. Why are we talking about this topic unknowingly? It was only then that Hua Jin came to his senses. It was too exaggerated. Because of a pot of Da Hong Pao, they had actually talked for so long. So, Gong Jie cast a sidelong glance at him. When do you intend to give it to me? What? Hua Jin could not help but feel confused by the sudden question. Gong Jie leaned closer to him and said word by word, 5,010,000. Hua Jin put up a defensive posture. You really want me to give it to you? I'm serious. Hua Jin's eyes darted around as he pretended to touch his body. Then he feigned exasperation and said, Aya, look, I don't have much money left on me. Young Master Gong, how about I give myself to you? Pay with your body? You can understand it that way. Gong Jie could not help but laugh. Hua Jin saw him smile, so he held his face with both hands and deliberately raised a charming smile, smiling very sweetly. Anyway, I'm conservatively estimating that I'm worth at least 5 million yuan. How about I give myself to you? Deal. When Gong Jie said these two words, Hua Jin looked surprised. Young Master Gong, I couldn't tell that you like men? I'm not interested in men. After a pause, Gong Jie looked at him meaningfully. But I'm very interested in you. Hearing this, Hua Jin's mouth was half open. He could not react for a moment. He was just joking and wanted to fool him with this 5 million yuan. How did he fall into the ditch he had dug? He did not know how to continue this conversation. Why? Are you regretting it? Hua Jin was speechless for a moment. He stood up awkwardly. Just as he was about to say something, the plane suddenly shook violently. Hua Jin lost his balance and fell onto Gong Jie's body. The plane encountered turbulence, causing it to shake. Gong Jie supported him with one strong arm. Hua Jin grabbed the corner of Gong Jie's shirt tightly to stabilize his center of gravity. Chapter 43:19. After the turbulence passed, Hua Jin lowered his head and tried to stand up, but Gong Jie reached out and pulled him back into his embrace. Hua Jin's face was burning. At the same time, his heart beat even faster because of his sudden action. Gong Jie lowered his head to size him up before asking out of the blue, Are you throwing yourself at me? When did I do that? Hua Jin struggled to get up, but Gong Jie grabbed his arm again with a playful look in his eyes. Playing hard to get? What nonsense was this man talking about? Gong Jie pinched his cheek with one hand. If you make such a joke again in the future and I take it seriously, what should I do? His tone didn't sound like a question, but more like a question. Hua Jin's brain went blank. If I take it seriously, will you take responsibility? Hua Jin. He did not mean that at all. He just wanted to be tactful and did not mean anything else. Gong Jie could not bear to tease him anymore. He stood up and said, "If you encounter turbulence, it's not the safest choice to hide in someone's arms. You should return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt. This is the most basic safety measure." With that, under Hua Jin's glare, Gong Jie turned around and left. As soon as Gong Jie left, Hua Jin slammed the table. "This man, what kind of nonsense is he saying?" Hua Jin took a deep breath and finally calmed down. The 10-hour flight was long and torturous. Hua Jin fell asleep on the sofa. He did not know how long he had slept, but in his daze, he could only hear the rumbling of the turbulence and the ringing in his ears getting worse. He was jolted awake. He got up and looked out of the window, only to see that the plane had already pierced through the clouds and was rapidly descending toward an island. He found it very novel. This island has a very large port. This port is even much larger than the port in Osaka, Japan. There are many cargo ships docked at the port. From his high angle, it seems that he can only see a black mass of ships. Immediately after, as the plane descended rapidly, he saw a magnificent castle on the island. Even from afar, he could see it clearly. That majestic castle was magnificent. Usually, he would only see such castles in Hollywood movies. It was said that this castle had been built for a long time. It had a history of more than a few hundred years. When Gong Xiaoying bought this island, he also bought the land where the castle was located and moved it over. What was that saying? Indeed, one could do whatever one wanted with money. Hua Jin was already in a daze just by looking at her. This was the first time he had set foot on the Gong family's island. However, seeing it with his own eyes was far from what he had imagined. In his imagination, a private island, Hurricane's base, a military base, gunpowder. Hurricane's private island must be heavily guarded and gave off a gloomy feeling. However, the reality was that it was sunny and sunny. The sea was blue. Under the clouds, the true appearance of the castle was gradually revealed. It stood on the top of the island, exuding an inviolable majesty. Hua Jin sighed and widened his eyes. He leaned against the window and stared curiously at the castle, unable to take his eyes off it. Outside the castle, there was heavy security. Chapter 43:20. Hurricane. This was a term that seemed to control the entire world. Now, little by little, it was gradually becoming complete in front of him. After the plane landed, it went through a series of inspections. In Hurricane, almost all private planes returning from overseas, no matter who they were, had to go through a series of sophisticated inspections after landing. Even Gong Jie was no exception. They were worried that someone had tampered with the plane. He still remembered one time when Gong Jie came back from South Africa. After an inspection, he was shocked to find that many high-tech trackers had been secretly planted in his private plane without him knowing. These trackers were the most advanced technology in the world today. Even the 5 government buildings in Country M might not be able to detect them. If it were not for the meticulous inspection, these trackers would not have been discovered at all. Later, the plane was almost forced to be scrapped because no one could be sure if these trackers were still in the body of the plane. No one knew when these trackers had been planted. Since then, the landing inspection became more and more stringent. This time, the landing inspection took more than half an hour. When Hua Jin got off the plane with Natalia in his arms, he was tossed and turned a few more times. The reason why Hua Jin described it as tossing and turning was because the security personnel wanted nothing more than to lay him flat on the ground, strip him naked, and inspect him from the inside out. Was the inspection so strict? Why did he have to go through such a stringent inspection when he landed on the island? It was as if he was an international fugitive. Hua Jin still had a lingering fear in his heart. Such a huge scene also frightened Natalia. If Gong Jie had not stopped her, she might have had to go through a retina and blood test. After the inspection, Hua Jin saw Gong Jie and asked in fear, "You're probably the first person I've seen who wants to go through a physical examination after returning home." Gong Jie, on the other hand, was already used to it. This series of inspections, no matter who it is, except for a few members of the Gong family, there are no exceptions. "Why?" Hua Jin asked suspiciously. "Why do we have to go through such a detailed inspection when we come to this island?" "More than that." Gong Jie glanced at him. "While you're on the island, you'll be wearing a surveillance device. If you trespass into the restricted areas of Hurricane, you'll trigger the alarm of the entire island. Before you leave, all the restricted areas will be fingerprinted. If you go to a place you're not supposed to go, you won't be able to leave again. Hua Jin shuddered when he heard that. It's just going home. Is there a need for so many complicated procedures? Don't you feel tired? Gong Jie smiled coldly. That's why I don't like to go home. Hua Jin was stunned. He didn't know why, but he felt his heart ache. At least if he went home, he wouldn't have to go through such strict checks. This point, there was no human touch at all. For some reason, he felt like he was being tightly bound, and there was no warmth at all. Now, when Hua Jin turned back to look at the island shrouded in fog, he seemed to have another feeling. Suddenly, he felt that the magnificent castle was more like a prison than a home. Gong Jie gave Muyaja a call. To his surprise, it was Yun Shesher who answered. Chapter 43:21. Shao Jie. Gong Jie was a little surprised. Sister, you're awake? He pursed his lips and suddenly felt a little uneasy. Perhaps it was because he had taken Gong Fan away while she was unconscious. He waited silently for Yun Shesher to flare up at him. However, the expected anger did not come. Yun Shesher's calmness surprised him. Have you arrived at Hurricane safely? Gong Jie was a little surprised that Yun Shesher did not scold him. Where's Gong Fan? He's beside me. After a pause he said, Sister, don't you blame me? On the other side, Yun Shesher sighed helplessly. Why should I blame you, Shao Jie? Haven't you done enough for me? Gong Jie was speechless. He said self-deprecatingly, I'm sorry. I don't know what I can do for you, but I've done my best. Shao Jie, when I recover, I'll go to Hurricane to look for you. During this period, as his uncle, you must take good care of your nephew, okay? Yes, I will. Okay. Yun Shesher did not say much, but he could hear the loneliness and exhaustion in her voice. It was as if she was holding something back, and her voice was a little hoarse. Perhaps it was because of their telepathy. Gong Jie felt that she seemed to have made a serious decision. Sister. Yes? What are you thinking about? Gong Jie walked to the side and said worriedly, I have a feeling that you have a lot on your mind. After a long silence, Yun Shesher finally spoke. If there's really no other way, I'm really willing to give up on Gong Fan. At this point, Yun Shesher could not continue. She wanted to laugh to hide her heartache, but she could not hide it. I'm sorry to have worried you. All along, you've been indulging me and spoiling me. So much so that I've always imposed my own wishes on others. I'm sorry, Shao Jie. Don't apologize to me. Gong Jie said somewhat angrily. Big sister, how are you being willful? You've been the most sensible one since you were young. You'd rather be wronged than let others be wronged. I'm the one who's willful. You've always tolerated me since I was young. Now that I've matured, what's wrong with me spoiling you? He had an insufferably arrogant aura, as if no one in this world could stop him from treating her well. Yun Shesher was extremely touched. What had she done to deserve a husband like Mu Yaja, a younger brother like Gong Jie, and a pair of sensible sons like Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen? Thank you, but I've made my decision. I hope that I can be responsible for Yu Yu. I don't want him to suffer so much for me. Why is it for you? However, Gong Jie did not agree with her. Yu Yu is not only suffering for you, he also wishes to coexist with Gong Fan, isn't that so? Yun Shesher was stunned. Do you think that he's protecting Gong Fan for you only because of your wishful thinking? He once told me that he feels indebted to Gong Fan. All this while, Gong Fan has suffered for him. Hence, what he's suffering now is also for Gong Fan. Yun Shesher did not speak for a long time. Chapter 43:22. Okay. I understand. Shao Jie. The call ended. At the same time, Lisa and Gong Fan had also finished their inspection. The 10-hour flight was too tiring. Gong Jie arranged accommodation for them, gave them some instructions, and went back to rest. Hua Jin came to the door of a room. The door was ajar. Natalia, who was behind him, poked her head out. Seeing that Hua Jin did not open the door, she asked curiously, What's wrong? Why don't you open the door and go in? Okay. Could he say that he was afraid? He was afraid that once he opened the door, he would appear in the surveillance camera's range. Previously, he had heard from Gong Jie that the Gong family was heavily guarded. Other than the room, No one was allowed to step into any other place. However, the room was not a safe place either. He felt as if there were countless pairs of eyes staring at him at this moment. Seeing that Hua Jin was in a daze, Natalia walked past him and pushed the door open. When she pushed the door open, what greeted her was a luxurious room that Hua Jin had not expected. The overall style of the room was champagne-colored. Pure white curtains, white solid wood doors and windows. Upon entering the room, he saw an extremely luxurious walk-in closet. In the middle of the room was a luxurious four-poster princess bed. The champagne-colored curtains gently covered the edge of the bed, instantly giving off a dreamy feeling. This room was originally prepared by Gong Xiaoying for Yun Shishir. In fact, this room was secretly prepared by Gong Xiaoying many years ago for Yun Shishir. At that time, Gong Xiaoying did not know that Yun Shishir was still alive. This room was personally prepared by him for his beloved daughter. Even though Gong Xiaoying at that time had a deep understanding that perhaps this room would no longer be of use, he still kept it. All the cleaning work in the Gong family was done by the servants. Only this room was personally cleaned by Gong Xiaoying himself. After finishing his work, he would often come here to sit for a while. For a long time, this room had been spotless. Later on, he accidentally found out that Yun Shishir was still alive. After that, he returned to this room and sat there for the entire night. Gong Jie happened to pass by and heard Gong Xiaoying murmuring, "You're all grown up now. This room doesn't suit you anymore." Since then, the room had been left empty. However, it seemed that Gong Xiaoying rarely came. In the past, to him, this room was more like a spiritual sustenance. However, now that he knew that Yun Shishir was still alive, there was no reason for this room to exist anymore. However, there were many guest rooms in the Gong family and there was no shortage of rooms. Normally, there was no need to vacate this room. But since Natalia was here, Gong Jie remembered that Gong Xiaoying had prepared this room for her. So, he arranged this room for Natalia. Wow! The moment Natalia walked into the room, she threw herself onto the bed in excitement. What a beautiful bed! I like this bed. Which is prettier, the bed at home or here? Hua Jin was just asking casually, but Natalia replied without hesitation, I like the bed here. Hua Jin's eyelids twitched violently. He seemed to have heard Gong Jie mention before that this room was decorated by Gong Xiaoying. What era was Gong Xiaoying from? Chapter 43-23. Could it be that his sense of beauty couldn't catch up with the people of the previous generation? Hua Jin's confidence was instantly crushed. Knock, knock, knock. Just as Hua Jin was feeling gloomy, there was a sudden knock on the door. Turning around, he saw Alice standing at the door. The door wasn't closed, but she didn't come in either. Instead, she stood at the door and said to Hua Jin, "Is it convenient to take Natalia away?" Hearing that she was going to be taken away, Natalia immediately shrank behind Hua Jin in fear and clutched the corner of his shirt tightly. No. She didn't want to go with Alice. She was leaning against Hua Jin as if he was her savior. Hua Jin glanced at Natalia and gently held her shoulders. He stroked her hair gently and turned to ask Alice, "What's the matter?" "I want to do a checkup on Natalia." A checkup? Hua Jin couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She was on the plane for 10 hours and had to do such a long checkup. The child is exhausted. She hasn't gotten used to the environment yet and you want to take her away. Won't you? Alice heard this and crossed her arms. Why else do you think we took a 10-hour flight back here? It's not a complicated checkup either. We just want to check her basic values. We'll send her back right away. Hua Jin heard this and was speechless. Hence, he squatted down and coaxed Natalia. Go with Auntie Alice, okay? I'll wait for you here, okay? Where are we going? To do some checkup. He thought that Natalia would be unwilling and that she might cry and throw a tantrum, but she didn't. Natalia let go of his sleeve in disappointment. Her hands fell to the side as she nodded gently. Okay. She walked obediently to Alice's side. Although she was unwilling, she didn't say anything. Natalia, be good. I'll send you back later, okay? Okay. It was only when Alice took Natalia away that Hua Jin heaved a sigh of relief. However, as he wasn't familiar with this place, he stayed in the room and didn't dare to go anywhere. After such a long flight, he was extremely sleepy. Hence, he fell asleep as soon as he sat down on the sofa. Natalia and Gong Fan were brought to the laboratory. Alice first introduced the two children to the doctors in the laboratory one by one. This is Gong Fan, and this is Natalia. I've told you about them before. For a long time to come, our task will be very heavy. However, failure is not allowed. Do you hear me? Everyone was stunned and they were dumbfounded. Was not allowed failure? In the medical center, there were many experiments conducted every day. But Alice's requirements had never been so strict. Of's not allowed? How is that? Only after countless failures would one be able to sum up their experience and achieve success. Natalia leaned against Gong Fan, trembling in fear. In front of her stood a circle of people in white coats. This made her feel as though she had returned to the place where she used to be. Vaguely, she recalled the time in the hospital. The pungent smell of disinfectant, the cold faces, and the white coats that always swayed in front of her eyes. Immediately, she felt a wave of disgust. Chapter 43-24. Natalia sized him up with trepidation. Gong Fan gently held her hand. Even though he didn't say anything, he only gave her a determined look. Natalia felt comforted. It seemed that with him around, everything became less scary. Alice discussed with the specialists for a while and clapped her hands lightly. Okay, it's settled then. She turned around and looked at Natalia and Gong Fan. She immediately said, Okay, now it's my turn to introduce you to my partners. This is Manson, this is Luca, this is Zach. Natalia realized that the doctors behind Alice all looked very young. They were full of vitality and vitality. This was the medical team that Alice had set up. It was the best in the world. However, it was such a top team in the world. However, the teaching staff were all young people who were only in their 30s. Moreover, this medical team was not only loyal to Alice, but it also showed that Alice's personality was unparalleled. Unless she personally dismissed this team one day, it would definitely be a success. Now, I'm going to come up with a plan for the two of you. Before that, I need to accurately understand your physical condition. Natalia, cooperate with me, okay? Natalia asked uneasily. Will it hurt? If it hurts, it won't hurt other than taking blood. Oh. Natalia still had some lingering fear in her heart, but she still nodded resolutely. Gong Fan didn't need to say anything. He cooperated with Alice 100%. The two of them were sent for a series of examinations. At this moment, Alice suddenly received a call from Romanka. She was a little surprised that Romanka called. He rarely contacted her. Basically, if there was no special emergency, the two of them would communicate through email. Seeing that it was a call from him, Alice was a little cautious. After the call was put through, Romanka went straight to the point. How's Natalia's condition? Alice curled her lips. Everything is fine. At that moment, Natalia was right beside her. She held her phone and walked out of the room. Separated by a glass door, she made sure that Natalia couldn't hear their conversation. Then she slowly said, Professor, are you hiding something from me? On the other end, Romanka was clearly stunned for a moment. She hadn't expected her to ask such a question. Why do you ask? Do I need to tell you that? You should be clear about this. Alice didn't intend to delay any longer. She didn't want to go around in circles with Romanka. Natalia was now in her hands. From the moment she boarded the plane yesterday until today, all of Natalia's means of contacting Professor Romanka had been cut off by Alice. Therefore, Romanka could not get any information from Natarisa. It was probably because of this that he contacted her for the first time. Professor, I won't beat around the bush with you. I also hope that you can tell me the truth about everything. Romanka was silent for a while, but he only said vaguely, I don't know what you mean. Now, I'm no longer Natalia's guardian lawyer. I haven't even seen her in a long time. What do you want me to confess to you? Chapter 43-25. Confess her previous condition. Condition? Romanka pretended to be ignorant. As you can see, I've given you all the medical reports. Can't you study them yourself? Do you think I don't know? Several pages of Natalia's medical report are missing. Romanka was stunned. She was a little shocked by her words. Why? Are you surprised? Surprised that I would know that you tampered with the medical report? What do you mean by tampering? I don't understand. Alice lowered her voice and said, Several pages are missing from the report. If you didn't look at it carefully, You wouldn't have noticed it. You hid Natalia's medical report and then forged several copies of it and pasted them at the back of the report. The handwriting is too different. The previous page looks very old, and the new page is even several degrees whiter than the previous page. Do you think I'm an idiot? You. Romanka, listen to me, Alice said very seriously. No matter what, I need you to cooperate with me. You're the most authoritative professor in this field. I still have enough evidence that you used Natalia to do those inhumane experiments. If you don't cooperate with me, I'll take you to the International Court of Justice. What you'll face is not only a high amount of compensation, but also your reputation. How about it? Is this condition sincere enough? Professor Romanka was silent for a long time. After a long while, he finally sighed. The younger generation will surpass us in time. He sighed and said, How should I meet you? Alice smiled relaxedly and finally relaxed her eyebrows. She knew that Professor Romanka's words meant that he was willing to cooperate with her. This also meant that her negotiation was a success. Alice said loudly, I'll send a private plane to pick you up and issue a high-level pass to Hurricane. It's my honor to be able to visit the world's top medical technology center in my lifetime. After telling him what to do and ending the call, Alice finally felt a little relieved. Professor Romanka was the world's most authoritative expert in the field of multiple personality disorder. If Lu Zhou could get his help, then his progress would be much smoother. Alice was also worried that Professor Romanka would harm Gong Fan. He seemed to have a great interest in Gong Fan. However, apart from those conspiracy theories, she was confident that she could protect Gong Fan as long as he was in her territory. Next, they could only take one step at a time. There was no need to rush Natalia's illness, but Gong Fan's situation was not optimistic. She could not wait any longer, and neither could Gong Fan. Before Professor Romanka arrived, Alice once again hypnotized Gong Fan. However, there was no breakthrough in the hypnosis. Yu Yu was also in this body and there was no news of her. Alice wasn't an authoritative expert in this field before, so she didn't know much about the world of multiple personalities. If Gong Jie had not repeatedly urged her to cure Yu Yu, she would not have dabbled in this field. However, if Professor Romanka was willing to help her, things would be much smoother. Chapter 43-26. During the half a month on the island, Gong Fan and Natalia had a relatively easy time. The two little guys got along well with the doctors in the medical center. During their free time, Hua Jin and Gong Jie would take Gong Fan and Natalia out to sea to relax. During this period of time, Yun Shishir would video call Gong Fan on time every night. However, the two of them were secretive about certain things. Gong Fan was well aware of his situation and cherished every day he spent with Yun Shishir. Even though they were half a world apart, the video call every day was the most heartwarming time for Gong Fan. Compared to the busy Gong Jie and Alice, Hua Jin was much more free. However, when he was free, he did not dare to wander around the island. It was said that the island was shrouded in a quantum defense network, and there were invisible mechanisms and alarms everywhere at any time. If they were triggered, the entire island would be armed to the teeth. Hua Jin was not familiar with the island, so he did not dare to walk around recklessly. However, the castle had all kinds of entertainment facilities. Billiard room, video room, gym. When he was free, even if Gong Jie was not around, Hua Jin would take the two little guys for a walk by the beach. Alice teased him that during this period of time, he had accumulated a certain amount of experience in taking care of children. When he had his own children in the future and became a father, he would not be flustered when it came to taking care of children. However, Hua Jin did not know whether to be happy or worried. It was hard for him to imagine that he would have a child of his own in the future. He already regarded Natalia as his own flesh and blood. Therefore, even if there was a chance in the future, out of consideration for Natalia, he might not have another child. Half a month later, Romanka successfully met up with Alice. That night, Romanka ignored the exhaustion of the flight and entered the meeting room with Alice. Other than them, no one else was allowed to enter. In the meeting room, Romanka told Alice a shocking secret. Actually, you're right. I did hide something from you. That is... Romanka looked up and said with a serious expression, Actually, Natalia is the real second personality. Alice did not expect that this was what Professor Romanka wanted to tell her. When she heard this, she was in a daze for a long time and did not come back to her senses for a long time. That day, when you saw the child in my hospital, The personality that appeared was actually Natalia. Compared to Natalia, Natalia's personality was a typical sensitive one. She is fragile, sensitive, and looks cold on the outside, but she is actually very gentle on the inside. All this time, I haven't told you because I don't know how to bring this up. You're lying. Alice was a little angry. How was that possible? How could Natalia be the second personality? Alice didn't dare to believe Professor Romanka's words. Even though she had hired this person to help her treat Yu, she did not dare to fully believe Romanka's words. Hua Jin had mentioned it to her before. Professor Romanka might have taught Natalia hypnotism. Then, he wanted to use Natalia to control Yu. Chapter 43-27. However, she had never expected Natalia to be a second personality. Do you think I'm lying to you? Romanka leaned back in his chair with a serious expression. I know what you think of me. You must think that I'm an evil and unreasonable dark scientist who specializes in using weak and helpless children to conduct human experiments. Yes, Alice, to be honest, I have my own ambitions. Multiple personality disorder was still unknown in this world. In fact, there were many people with multiple personality disorder in this world. The list of people with multiple personality disorder did not include people with multiple personality disorder all over the world. In other words, the patients we have now are just the tip of the iceberg. Alice, I want to conquer this field too much, so I seem a little eager for quick success. Perhaps in your eyes, this is evil, but I don't think so. You don't have to think of me as evil. There's no need. Even though Romanka's tone seemed so sincere, Alice did not dare to believe him completely. According to what you said, could it be that Natalia's personality was created by you? Yes. Then why did you create such a personality? Alice was skeptical. This is your so-called personality society experiment? Not at all. In fact, the medical community has always believed that multiple personality disorder is a condition of nature. But I don't think that anyone can have this condition. So, I chose Natalia as the experimental subject. Natalia is a classic melancholic personality. So, in order to treat this personality disorder, I created the innocent, kind and warm Natalia. I still don't dare to believe what you said so easily. This fact was too far from the answer she knew. She could not believe that Natalia was a second personality. Then, it meant that Natalia was the main personality that would never disappear? Then, can you explain why Natalia knows hypnotism? Romanka was finally surprised when he heard this. He didn't expect Alice to be so meticulous in her discovery. How do you know that Natalia knows hypnotism? She hypnotized Hua Jin and Yu. Although I don't know what level her hypnotism is at, it should be at a higher level of sober hypnotism, right? Romanka was stunned. He suddenly smiled with admiration in his eyes. As expected of Alice, your observation is so meticulous. Yes, I taught Natalia hypnotism because she has trouble sleeping. So, I taught her hypnotism and used it to control Natalia. So, it was through that crystal ball? Yes. This is unexpected. Romanka, how did you teach her? Chapter 43-28. For now, let's not talk about Natalia. Let's put this matter aside. Alice paused and leaned closer to him. She lowered her voice and asked seriously, Is there really no other way? Ha! I don't understand what you mean. Although you don't know much about Yu's condition, I've mentioned it to you before. But, oh, I get it now. You want me to work with you to come up with a treatment plan for Yu. But you don't seem to trust me. Look, you haven't even shown me a detailed medical report on Yu. Romanka looked at her calmly, his gaze probing. She sucked in a deep breath of cold air and said firmly, There's no way I'll report Yu's condition to you. Hearing this, Romanka laughed instead of getting angry. Look, you're not even willing to tell me his condition. How can I cooperate with you? Based on your words, even if you don't know his condition, you should be able to come up with a treatment plan. Alice obviously believed in Romanka's abilities. Romanka, however, laughed. What do you take me for? Do you think I'm a god? You're a doctor yourself. Don't you think it's unreasonable for you to say such things? Romanka paused and continued, If a doctor doesn't understand the patient's condition, he won't be able to come up with a treatment plan. Moreover, in the field of multiple personality disorder, it's still a difficult problem to overcome. Relatively speaking, Even if the patient's medical record is complete, he may not be able to come up with a perfect treatment plan. Alice sat up in excitement. I can't delay any longer. If I really can't come up with a perfect treatment plan, then I'll use hypnosis to kill all the other personalities. Oh. Romanka's interest was piqued and he caught the main point. All the other personalities? Does this mean that he has already developed more than 3 personalities? Alice didn't expect him to be so meticulous. He actually caught the main point so quickly. You sound very anxious. It seems like Yu's condition has reached a point where he can't take responsibility? Romanka observed her expression as he spoke. Finally, he laughed and said, It seems like it's not as serious as I thought. After all, you're still unwilling to disclose Yu's medical record to me. It seems like it's not that bad. Alice had no choice. She had no other choice but to say honestly, I really don't know what to do. After all, I'm not an authority in this field, but you are. Now, I want to protect both Gong Fan and Yu's personalities. But something happened recently. What's the situation? Romanka's curious. He was assassinated in an unknown situation. Even Romanka, who had seen a lot of the world, couldn't help but frown when he heard this. Alice didn't bother to hide it from him and recounted the events of that day in detail to him. Romanka was silent for a while and immediately said, It seems that he has undergone the 2nd Division. Chapter 43-29. There's a situation where one personality splits into 2, 2 personalities splits into 4, and so on. As for how many personalities can be split, there are no detailed records at the moment. There are at most 21 known personalities recorded in the records. Can dual personality really become multiple personality disorder? To put it in simpler terms, the emergence of dual personality disorder is when there's too much pain, a person can no longer bear it. Therefore, the mental state splits into a second personality out of self-protection mechanism. Then, when dual personality disorder evolves into multiple personality disorder, it means that the mental mechanism has begun to create a personality society. This personality society can be created by the patient himself, or it can be created by the outside world through certain means. Some theories suggested that multiple personality disorder was related to childhood trauma. Internationally, children before the age of 7 were considered to be the golden age of children. If a child suffered serious mental trauma before the age of 7, it was very likely that it would lead to mental illness. Multiple personality disorder was one of the possibilities. When a person suffered a strong impact that was difficult to deal with, they might try to close their eyes and empty their mind to reach the realm of this did not happen to them. Then, they might create a personality that could replace them to bear the huge trauma and impact. This personality might immediately retaliate, become blind or deaf, scream, or curl up into a ball. Whenever similar pressure or impact appeared again, these personalities might automatically complete the transformation. Take Yu as an example. Li Qin and Yun Na's bullying in childhood. These tragic experiences tore apart a healthy Yu mentally, prompting the establishment of another personality. The 2 personalities could each perform their own duties and replace Yu to deal with different situations. Each personality of a patient with multiple personality disorder was stable, complete, and had different thinking patterns and memories. These split personalities were all-encompassing. They could be of different genders, ages, races, and even species. They took turns to control the patient's behavior. When the other personalities were controlling the behavior, the original personality might be unaware of what it had done during this period of time. This would lead to a serious time loss phenomenon. If the split personalities knew of each other's existence, it was called coexisting consciousness. They could even sit down for a meeting. My suggestion is that we use brain imaging to observe patients with multiple personality disorder. The difference in brain imaging between patients with dissociative identity disorder and patients with high and low hallucinations is very obvious. Then, what do you think Yu's situation should be? Do you want my suggestion? Alice nodded solemnly. If you really want to keep 2 personalities, it's not impossible. Treating multiple personality disorder was a difficult and very individualized process. Scientists and doctors had tried many methods for different patients. One of the most famous methods was personality fusion. The therapist understood and analyzed the patient's different personalities to find an internal personality that was familiar with all the personalities. It was usually called the internal helper, and become the core personality. Chapter 43-30. However, Even if the treatment was successful, the personality might disintegrate again due to external pressure. In addition, because the patient was highly suggestible, hypnosis was often used to summon the patient's different personalities for treatment. However, this was not a cure for the root cause. It was just a supplementary method. In fact, internal disintegration was not a special thing. It was a very common phenomenon. Ordinary people had experienced internal disintegration. For example, reading a wonderful novel and being completely immersed in the plot, completely unaware of what was happening around them. There were also daydreaming, meditation, forgetfulness, and so on. However, this was not an illness, but an ordinary daily mental activity. However, multiple personality disorder was already the extreme of such a state. I got it. Alice stood up. Then, let's start with the brain imaging. She had not done a brain imaging on Yu yet. The Hurricane Medical Center was very well equipped. Therefore, no matter what kind of examination it was, it would not be difficult. As long as Yu was willing to cooperate. Romanka nodded. After that, Alice and Gong Fan had a discussion. When Gong Fan heard that he was going to do a brain imaging, he was initially a little resistant. However, after Alice explained what a brain imaging was, Gong Fan agreed to do it. It was not that he did not trust Alice, but he did not trust Romanka very much. However, with Alice around, the little guy still gave her some face. Alice brought Gong Fan into the examination room. In the examination room, there was no light. Only the faint blue light was quietly lit. In the huge examination room, there was only a very large instrument. It looked like an MRI, but it was not an MRI. The two instruments looked very similar. Alice instructed Gong Fan to lie down. His head was placed in a white helmet. Alice pressed the button and Gong Fan felt himself being slowly pushed in. Lie down obediently. I won't say anything. Don't move. Okay. Gong Fan was very obedient and agreed. Alice walked out of the door. Professor Romanka sat in front of the display screen and looked at the brain imaging screen. On the blank screen, a few black dots were listed. Look here. Professor Romanka gently tapped on the screen. The brain imaging differences between patients with dissociative identity disorder and those with high and low hallucinations are very significant. DID indicates dissociative identity disorder, CH indicates high hallucinations, CL indicates low hallucinations, TIS indicates trauma-related status, and NIS indicates neutral status. Alice looked at the image and sucked in a breath of cold air. Does this mean that there are 5 personalities residing in Yu's body? There are 4 active personalities. 4. How is that possible? Alice obviously did not believe him. Usually, only Yu and Gong Fan can change their personalities. Including the personalities that appeared that day, there should be at most 3 of them. How did the 4 of them come about? Are you sure you'll be able to distinguish the other personalities based on their appearance? When Alice heard this, she felt a chill run down her spine. Based on what you're saying, the other personalities have already appeared unknowingly, but we just didn't notice it? Just thinking about it made Alice realize how terrifying multiple personalities were. If there was a disguised personality, he would have been lurking for so long. Chapter 43:31. How would you be able to detect it? Romanka said half-jokingly, when other personalities appear, there won't be much change in appearance. At most, there will be a change in temperament. However, temperament is abstract. Moreover, you have already determined that the child has dual personalities, so naturally, you won't think of anything else. Alice frowned. So, you're saying that he has 5 personalities? No, what I mean is that there are at least 4 active personalities. Then the personalities that haven't been imaged may not be shown, but as time passes, these personalities will appear like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. However, this will take time. However, the 4 personalities are at least active. Alice asked worriedly, then, do you think that the other personalities will have disguised behavior? I'm not sure about this. However, if we follow logical reasoning, it might be possible. Alice's expression became even more serious. What should we do? Romanka pondered for a moment. If you trust me, then submit his file to me. I'll try to come up with a treatment plan. I'm very interested in him, but don't worry. I won't do any messy experiments on him. I'll be careful. Alice hesitated for a long time. Romanka was also very patient. He looked at her quietly. Finally, he saw that she nodded reluctantly. Okay, I'll trust you this time. Alice brought Professor Romanka to the archives room. She pushed open the heavy door. There were dozens of rows of tall bookshelves in the archives room. It was all-encompassing and stored a lot of patient information and medical literature. Romanka was not in a hurry to urge Alice to look for Yu Yu's medical report. As soon as he stepped into the archives room, his eyes widened in surprise. This is unbelievable. It's like a treasure trove. It's not wrong to say that it's a treasure trove. Ordinary people don't have the right to set foot in here. Even in my medical team, there are only a few people who have the right to set foot in here. Then I would be honored. Alice led Yu Yu to a row of filing cabinets. The filing room was filled with high-tech elements. There were automatic bookshelves and pupil scans. Alice entered the relevant information and soon, Yu Yu's medical report was pushed out. Alice carefully handed the medical report to Romanka and said in a deep voice, "Professor, we might as well try peaceful means before resorting to force. This file is very important, and it's the only one. You have to keep it properly. Also, if you have any ulterior motives toward Yu Yu, we won't tolerate it." "Now, my personal freedom is in your hands," Professor Romanka said helplessly. "Aren't you being too defensive?" "I have no choice but to be on guard." Alice revealed her true feelings. Some researchers are willing to give up their lives and dignity for the sake of research. The truth is extremely important. For detectives, the results of their deductions are more important than their lives. Then, for medical scientists, if they can study difficult diseases in this field, of course, it's more important than their lives. Now that science is so advanced, you should know what it's built on. Chapter 43-32. Alice said softly, "It's built on countless failed experiments." "Okay. But no matter what, Yu Yu can't be a test subject. I hope you can make a clear distinction." "I understand." After Alice and Romanka's meeting ended, it was already very late. At this time, Gong Fan and Natalia had already gone back to rest. After leaving the research room, Alice stared at Romanka's back view and called for her right-hand man. "Ricky, send someone to keep an eye on him." "Yes." The assistant behind her was very strict. He asked in confusion, "Are you still worried about him?" "Not really. The main thing is that I have to be wary of Romanka, this old fox." Alice was very reluctant to hand over Yu Yu's medical report to Romanka. But now, other than this, she couldn't think of a better solution. She could only hope that this old fox could come up with a useful solution. Romanka took the medical report and locked himself in the room. He was cooped up for more than a week. In this week, Yu Yu and Gong Fan's personalities switched back and forth a few times. When Yu Yu woke up just now, he saw himself on the island and was quite frightened. Early in the morning, Gong Jie was awakened by a commotion. He walked out of the room and saw Yu Yu in his pajamas, standing in the corridor in a daze. He looked around and a group of people followed behind him. They were holding their coats in fear, afraid that the crown prince would catch a cold. Gong Jie walked over in confusion, thinking that he was Yu Yu. However, when he turned around and the little guy spoke, Gong Jie instantly recognized that the child in front of him was not Gong Fan but Yu Yu. "Uncle? Why am I here?" Gong Jie was also very surprised, but he quickly calmed down. He waved the servants away and took the cotton slippers and coat. The corridor was paved with marble. Gong Jie was worried that he would catch a cold, so he squatted down patiently and said to him, "Stretch out your leg." Yu Yu obediently stretched out his feet and let him put on his shoes and coat for him. He looked up and asked in confusion, "Why am I here? Is this Ashland Island?" "No. This is a hurricane." "Hurricane? Didn't you come here before?" Gong Jie did not think much of it. Yu Yu turned around and looked at the unfamiliar corridor. Even though he had been here before, he had never been to a castle before. He could not react to such a grand and majestic style. Yu Yu looked around in confusion, still unable to understand. "Why am I in hurricane?" Gong Jie then realized that Yu Yu seemed to know nothing about Yun Shishir's injury. What he did not expect was that Yun Shishir had been stabbed and was lying in a hospital bed at this moment. Gong Jie was a little hesitant. He did not know if he should tell him about this. However, Yu Yu was extremely sensitive. He looked at Gong Jie's hesitant expression and raised his eyebrows suspiciously. Did something happen to Mommy? The boy was so agitated that he tugged at the corner of his shirt and asked anxiously, What exactly happened? Tell me, tell me. Your mommy is injured. Yu Yu was shocked and his face turned pale. Injured? How did she get injured? Don't you have any consciousness at all? Yu Yu sucked in a breath of cold air when he heard that. Chapter 43:33. What exactly happened? Tell me quickly. Everyone suspects that Gong Fan stabbed her. That day, for some reason, Gong Fan lost control of his emotions and was sent to the hospital for emergency treatment because he accidentally took an overdose of painkillers. Gong Jie recounted everything that had happened to Yu Yu, no matter how big or small. But don't worry, your mommy is fine now. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to stand in front of you so calmly. Yu Yu knew that Gong Jie cared about Yun Shirshir as much as he did. When he heard this, he calmed down and lowered his head. No one knew what he was thinking. Gong Jie asked tentatively, What do you think? I think this matter is very strange. I think that when Mommy was stabbed, it was definitely not Gong Fan's personality. But it's impossible. Dual personality. How could there be other personalities living in my body? Then, I can't be sure if those personalities are dangerous. So, we brought you back to Hurricane. Alice has already worked with Romanka to think of a treatment plan. Yu Yu's expression became even more solemn. He leaned against the railing and frowned. What did Alice say? She didn't say anything to me. There doesn't seem to be any progress. In that case, Gong Jie couldn't help but be surprised that he didn't suspect Gong Fan. Haven't you ever suspected that Gong Fan did this? Impossible. Why? Yu Yu took a deep breath. He cares about Mommy no less than you or me. I'm different. Other than Mommy, I have other people I care about. But other than Mommy, he doesn't care about anything. How could he do something to hurt Mommy? Impossible. Yu Yu trusted Gong Fan more than anyone else. Since he was already on this island, it meant that he would have to cooperate with the treatment for a long time and wouldn't be able to go back. Since he was already here, he might as well make the best of it. Yu Yu cooperated with everything. However, there was one thing that he insisted on. If the treatment plan had to kill Gong Fan's personality, then he would be the first to be unwilling. He believed that if Gong Fan died, his soul would be incomplete. Gong Fan and he were complete. The method he hoped for the most was for the two personalities to merge together. This was the most ideal state for both him and Gong Fan. During this period, Gong Fan and Yu Yu's personalities switched back and forth a few times. 2 weeks later, Romanka finally walked out of the room and mentioned to Alice that he wanted to do a hypnosis experiment. When it comes to hypnosis, Alice is very cautious. Romanka knows her worries, so she mentioned that she can also be present during the hypnosis experiment. What kind of hypnosis experiment was it? I want to create an illusion through hypnosis and summon the personalities of Gong Fan and Yu Yu to meet each other. Roman paused for a moment before continuing. However, during the hypnosis process, we can't rule out the possibility that other personalities will appear in the dream. That's very dangerous. Alice realized the dangerous nature of this experiment. If other more dangerous personalities appeared in this dream and caused harm to Yu Yu and Gong Fan, as outsiders, they couldn't interfere at all. Romanka nodded. Before any experiment is mature, there will be risks. I have to make this clear to you. But there's no other way. This experiment has to be carried out. Chapter 43:34. That evening, Alice brought Yu Yu into the laboratory to wait for Romanka's arrival. Sitting in the laboratory, Yu Yu was obviously a little uneasy. He confirmed again, I will be able to see Gong Fan in this hypnosis, right? Yes. Yu Yu suddenly felt a little nervous. Before this, he had learned from Alice that there were other personalities living in his body. This meant that the chances of him meeting the other personalities in this dream would be very high. In other words, he might meet the other personalities before meeting Gong Fan. Are you sure that the people I saw in my dreams under hypnosis are my other personalities? Yes. Then, if that personality looks the same as the other personalities, how can I tell them apart? The reason why he asked this was because Gong Fan had written in his diary that he had dreamed of someone who looked exactly like Yu Yu chasing after him. Gong Fan had suspected that this person was Yu Yu. However, when he knew that there might be other personalities living in this body, he started to have doubts. Perhaps the personality who looked exactly like Yu was someone else. Yu suspected that there were two personalities living in his body that looked exactly like him. The appearance of multiple personalities might be the same, but the chances of them being different were higher. For example, there was a patient who had more than 10 personalities living in his body. However, these personalities had different appearances. There was a blonde girl, a middle-aged man, and even an FBI detective. Each of them played a different role. Alice felt a headache coming on. Yu, your condition is more complicated, so I can't say who you will meet in this hypnosis. However, you have to be vigilant. Why do you say that? Alice said with a serious expression. Because in the dream, other than you, if the other personalities are fatally injured, they will disappear completely. Yu quickly understood what she meant and couldn't help but shudder. He didn't expect that this experiment would be so risky. He was a little scared. You mean that if someone kills Gong Fan in my dream, his personality will really disappear completely? Yes. What about me? You won't disappear. You have to remember this forever. Alice suddenly became agitated. Yu was shocked by her nervous expression. First of all, you have to remember that you are the main personality. In the dream, no matter what attacks you encounter, you will never disappear and never die. No matter what kind of injuries you suffer, even if it is real, you can't believe it, otherwise. Otherwise what? Otherwise, you will never wake up and let the other personalities occupy your body. Yu couldn't help but gasp. Chapter 43:35. Yu nodded solemnly. He didn't know why, but his heart felt heavy. I understand. I'll do my best to protect Gong Fan. When Alice heard this, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Idiot, you just have to protect yourself. But as you said, even if I die in the dream, I still exist in the real world. But Gong Fan's life is in danger. I have to protect him. When Alice heard this, she fell silent for a while. She didn't know why, but she thought of Yun Shirshir's previous worries. She couldn't help but ask indirectly, if one day, everyone gives up on Gong Fan, what will you do? Why would you give up on him? Yu expressed his confusion. I will never give up on Gong Fan. He is another me. He is the other half of my soul. If he disappears, then no matter how outstanding I am, I will be incomplete. Alice nodded in relief and scratched the bridge of his nose. You are such a gentle child. Soon, Professor Romanka arrived. He brought some tools necessary for hypnosis. When he walked into the room, he stood in front of Yu and asked with concern, Are you ready? Yes. This is a cup of milk tea. Professor Romanka passed the milk tea in his hand to him. Drink this milk tea. There is a small dose of sleeping pills in it. It's not much. Before entering the hypnosis experiment, Yu had to take some sleeping pills. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to enter the hypnosis in a good state when he was extremely awake. Yu had just taken a sip of the milk tea when Romanka had already set up a dim table lamp. He turned on the table lamp, walked to the window, and drew the curtains. The huge room suddenly fell into a dead silence and darkness. The only light left was the table lamp in front of Yu. It was extremely weak. After drinking the milk tea, Yu still didn't feel much. He didn't feel sleepy either. He had enough sleep, so he was very awake. Professor Romanka sat down before him and greeted him in a friendly manner. Yu, hello, I'm Romanka. He extended his hand to Yu as if he was greeting a gentleman. Yu shook his outstretched hand and smiled. Hello. Next, we're going to start our experiment. Are you ready? Yes. All right, then let me tell you a story. First, lean back on the chair and relax your body. Yes, very good. He instructed Yu to adjust her condition. Then he softened his voice. Don't breathe too quickly. Be quiet. Be quiet. Slowly adjust your breathing rate. He placed a piano metronome on the table and adjusted the rhythm. Then, he instructed Yu to adjust her breathing according to the rhythm of the metronome. Next, Romanka began to tell him stories. It was a very boring fairy tale. Yu didn't know why Romanka was telling this story. Wasn't it supposed to be a hypnosis experiment? Why was he telling a story? However, only Alice knew that Romanka's hypnosis had officially begun without Yu noticing. Chapter 43:36. Yu Yu didn't know when he lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he opened his eyes and realized that he was in a huge ward. The reason why he knew that he was in a ward was because when he opened his eyes, all he could see was a snow-white color. He could even vaguely smell the smell of disinfectant. His mind was in a daze. It took him a long time to adjust and realize that he was in the world that Romanka had hypnotized him. Was this a dream? Or was it a different dimension? He remembered that Alice had told him that after hypnosis, he had to keep his guard up against the people he met in this world. What might appear in this world might be the hidden and dangerous personality in his body. Yu Yu immediately became alert. He got out of bed and looked around. After confirming that there was no one else in the ward, he began to rummage through the room. The ward was very big, and it was fully equipped with everything that was needed. In addition to the usual facilities in a hospital, there was medicine, needles. Yu Yu was a little scared. He was especially afraid of such a space. He had been in the hospital since he was young and hated such an environment. Now that he was in such a space, it was inevitable that his heart would palpitate. Professor Romanka had said that he would summon Gong Fan's personality. However, if Gong Fan appeared, then the other personalities might appear as well. Moreover, he could not tell from his appearance whether it was Gong Fan or another personality if it was someone who looked exactly like Gong Fan. Yu Yu picked up the scalpel on the cart and walked to the door. He carefully pushed it open. After pushing the door open, there was a spacious corridor outside. There was a long corridor on both sides. From his angle, he couldn't tell where the end of the corridor led to. Opposite the corridor was a row of floor-to-ceiling windows. However, the strange thing was that although the sunlight outside the window was bright and warm, it couldn't penetrate the window. It was as if it was isolated by an invisible enchantment. The sunlight outside the window was bright and beautiful, but it couldn't shine through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Therefore, the corridor was especially dark. Yu Yu walked to the window and pushed it open. A strong gust of wind rushed in. He looked down and was surprised to find that the floor he was on was more than 10 meters above the ground. At a glance, it was about 5 stories high. Yu Yu closed the door and looked around. After weighing the pros and cons, she finally decided to walk to the right. "Because I'm Yu Yu," he muttered in his heart. This was probably a form of joy in the midst of bitterness. As he walked, he suddenly heard footsteps overlapping with his own. His hearing was exceedingly sharp. Alertly, he stopped in his tracks and leaned against the wall, trying to listen carefully to where the footsteps were coming from. What was even more frightening was that, when he stopped in his tracks, the footsteps stopped in an instant too. Could it be the echo of his footsteps? Was he so sensitive that he mistook the echoes as someone else's footsteps? Impossible. The sound of footsteps was much faster than his own. Yu Yu took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Chapter 43-37. Alice had once said that no matter what happened to him in the dream, he was the main personality and would never die. Perhaps because of this, he was fearless and Yu Yu had become more daring. He leaned against the wall and moved his feet slightly, listening carefully for the echo of his footsteps. There was no echo. Hence, he was relieved and started to walk freely with the intention of testing the waters. However, it didn't take long for the strange footsteps to be heard again. Moreover, it overlapped with his footsteps. Yu Yu tried to distinguish the footsteps from behind. He pretended to be calm as he walked. Then, he suddenly turned around and looked behind him. In the distance, a black figure flashed past the end of the corridor. Obviously, the black figure was very alert. After realizing that he had been discovered, he quickly went into a room from the corridor. The door of the ward was not open. Hence, the black figure seemed to be sticking close to the door and curling himself up. Yu Yu suddenly felt his limbs turn cold. This person was obviously following him. But, what was his motive for following him? Yu Yu took half a step back, suspecting the identity of the black figure. Could it be Gong Fan? Yu Yu called out carefully, "Gong Fan." For a while, there was no movement. He stared in that direction as he slowly retreated, luring him out. When he moved, the black figure seemed to have heard the footsteps and thought that he had left. Hence, he appeared again. Yu Yu saw the black figure slowly appear at the end of the corridor. Even though they were far apart, he could clearly feel that the person's eyes met his. Yu Yu could not see his face clearly, but he could clearly feel that the black figure was slightly stunned. Gong Fan, is that you? His voice was slightly louder. The black shadow's footsteps paused. Then, it slowed down a little and walked towards him. Could it really be Gong Fan? Yu thought and walked towards him nervously. However, halfway there, he could clearly feel that the black figure's footsteps had quickened. No! He was not Gong Fan. Gong Fan was about the same height as him, but this black shadow was quite tall. Yu estimated that the black shadow was an adult male who was at least 1.8 meters tall. How could Gong Fan be so tall? It was not Gong Fan. Then who could he be? Yu suddenly remembered the dangerous personality that Professor Romenka had mentioned. Could this be it? Oh no. Could it be another personality? Yu took a few steps back and suddenly realized that the black figure had sped up and was walking towards him. He knew that something was wrong and turned to run. He had only taken a few steps when the black shadow behind him quickened its pace. Yu broke out in cold sweat. He almost didn't dare to look back as he desperately picked up the path and ran. At this moment, the huge hospital had become the battlefield of this chase. In such a big hospital, he almost didn't have time to think about where to go out. Seeing that the door of a room was open, he rushed in without thinking, turned around and locked the door. Yu nervously leaned against the wall as he listened to the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. Then when he reached the door, he suddenly paused as if he was judging something. Chapter 43:38. Who was this person? Just now, when they had looked at each other from afar, Yu could clearly sense a murderous look in his eyes. While holding his breath, Yu could clearly feel that the person outside the door had tried to turn the doorknob, but when he realized that the door was locked, he turned around and left. As the footsteps faded away, Yu heaved a sigh of relief and let out a long sigh. He's finally gone. Yu leaned against the door and turned around, only to realize that there was someone else in the room. It was a very big ward. Yu walked in quietly and suddenly saw someone sitting on the bed. It was a girl. She had long black hair that fell over her shoulders. She had delicate features and looked to be about 15 or 16 years old. However, there was a hint of Yunshusher in her eyes. She was leaning against the bed and looking out of the window. Her gaze was blank, so much so that even after Yu had entered the room, she did not notice his presence. She was wearing a hospital gown and was hugging her knees as she sat on the bed. She looked a little weak and pitiful. Perhaps because of the girl, Yu's vigilance was slightly reduced. However, at the same time, he felt that something was amiss. Why would such a girl appear in his dreams? Could it be that this was one of his personalities? Yu was a little suspicious. Who are you? Ah! Yu's sudden voice startled her. The girl lifted her head and looked at him helplessly. When she saw that it was Yu, she calmed down a little. Who are you? My name is Yu. Yu. The girl tilted her head. Obviously, this name was a little unfamiliar to her. My name is Shanshan. Shanshan. Yu smiled. What a nice name. He tried to get closer to her. Seeing that the girl didn't seem to reject him, he moved a little faster. He walked to the bed, but there was no place to sit. When the girl saw this, she immediately moved to the side considerately, leaving one side of the bed empty. Yu immediately said, "Thank you." Thus, he sat down on the edge of the bed. The girl smiled at him, but from her pale face, it was obvious that her body was not well. What happened to you? Yu was puzzled. You don't look well. Are you sick? The girl shook her head and hesitated for a moment before nodding. What happened? You're right, but it doesn't seem right. I'm sick, but I don't know what illness I have. Anyway, in my impression, I've always been locked in the ward. Not going anywhere? Yes, it's just me. Shanshan smiled. Actually, it's quite good like this. Although it's lonely and boring, sometimes I feel cheerful when I lean against the window and look out. Yu followed her gaze and looked out of the window. The view of the garden outside the window gave him a sense of déjà vu. It was as if in his memory, when he was young, he had been in the hospital all year round. He had been guarding a window all day long, and through this window, he could see the view of the back garden. In the spring, many children who came to visit their relatives would play on the lawn. There was a gentle breeze and many kites flew in the sky, but he could only watch helplessly. Don't you feel lonely? Chapter 43:39. As the girl spoke, She raised her head and looked at him suspiciously. Who are you? Why haven't I seen you before? Yu did not know how to explain. He immediately changed the topic and asked, Are you alone? Don't you have other family members? Yes. Shan did not think too much and did not notice Yu's intention to change the topic. She answered his question. I have a sister called Ran Ran. Ran Ran? Yes. But my sister always bullies me, so I'm a little afraid of her. If you see her, you don't have to tell her that I'm here. I don't want to see her. In other words, the various people in Yu's childhood memories will become the shadows of the personalities in his body. Alice touched her nose gently and came to this conclusion. Professor Romanka nodded. That's about it. After Yu fell asleep, Romanka put on a brain monitor for Yu. At the same time, he used it to check his physical condition in his dream. Furthermore, he could also check the situation of the personalities that appeared. Through the test, Alice found that Yu's brainwave frequency was sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes calm, and sometimes fluctuating violently. Fluctuating violently meant that he was afraid. Alice did not know what Yu saw in his dream to cause such strong emotional fluctuations. She sighed. Wouldn't it be great if I could enter his dream? If you interfere at this time, Yu might go crazy. Go crazy? Alice felt that it was a little unbelievable. Is there any scientific basis for this? For example, Yu's mental strength is like a few orderly highways, and the different personalities are like speeding cars on the highway. If you interfere, what will happen when the cars drive into the other highways in the opposite direction? Collision. If his mental state is damaged, it will lead to disorder. Therefore, the consequences will be unimaginable. Of course, not everyone will be like this, but just in case, I don't recommend interfering with him. Understood. Romanka's explanation was easy to understand, so she could easily understand what he meant. Alice sat down on a chair not far from Yu. She looked a little dejected. So you're saying that we can only watch from the sidelines and can't do anything? Yes. This is a deep level of hypnosis. It's different from the superficial hypnosis you did before. You can't interfere. You can only wait and see. Can you wake him up? Yes, but it needs to be done in a professional way. Alice was still a little uneasy. She wasn't an authority in this field, but Romanka was. If he secretly did something, she might not be able to detect it. It was because of this that she felt uneasy. Until now, she still couldn't completely trust Romanka. However, there was nothing she could do except ask Romanka for help. He could only pray secretly, hoping that things would develop smoothly. Romanka also sat down next to her. He knew that Alice was worried about him, so she didn't want to leave. However, he didn't mind. Chapter 43:40. Alice looked at Yu quietly. Although she didn't show it on her face, she was praying that Yu and Gong Fan would be able to get through this safely. At night, Yu suddenly woke up. Alice was pleasantly surprised that he had woken up. She couldn't hold it in anymore. She had too many questions that she wanted to ask. However, Yu had just woken up and was still in a daze. Hence, she forced herself to calm down. How are you, Yu? Do you feel better? Are you more awake? Be quiet first. Romanka gestured for her to be quiet. Then, he brought a glass of milk and placed it in front of Yu. However, little did he know that little Munchkin looked up and scanned his surroundings. He muttered to himself, "Where is this?" Then he turned around and looked at him deeply. His gaze was obviously a little confused. I am not Yu. Alice and Romanka were both stunned. Gong Fan saw their strange expressions and couldn't help but worry. What's wrong with Yu? Did something happen? What's going on? Alice looked at Romanka worriedly. She seemed a little anxious. Then, where's Yu? Romanka also didn't expect this to happen. After all, no matter what kind of experiment it was, there would always be some unexpected accidents in every experiment. Now, he had encountered a troublesome problem. He had hypnotized Yu, hoping that Yu would enter the dream realm and find Gong Fan. Also, the two of them would work together in the dream realm to explore the potential personalities in his body. However, it was still an hour earlier than the time he should have woken up. What made Romanka and Alice even more unprepared was that the person who woke up was Gong Fan. This meant that Yu Yu was trapped in the dream realm. If Yu Yu wanted to wake up, now that Gong Fan had taken over his body, he would not be able to return to his original position. Romanka and Alice looked at each other worriedly. Gong Fan looked at them strangely and asked nervously, "What's going on?" "It's like this. We were originally conducting an experiment." Romanka explained the purpose of their experiment in detail. Gong Fan was very smart and immediately understood their intentions. In addition, he had heard Alice mention that they wanted to do such an experiment before, so he gladly accepted it. Alice said that Yu Yu's ideal state was for the two best personalities, Yu Yu and Gong Fan, to merge together. That would be the best outcome. He also agreed with this plan. However, in other words, if I suddenly wake up in this experiment and take over the body, Yu Yu won't be able to come back, right? Alice said hesitantly. Yes, but it shouldn't be a big deal. No, it's dangerous. Romanka suddenly interrupted Alice. This time, Yu Yu didn't sleep much as usual. I hypnotized him to enter the XY dimension, hoping that he can find the other personalities. When the time is up, he better come back. If he stays in that dimension for too long, I'm afraid that those dangerous personalities will appear and harm him. Alice said doubtfully, "The main personality will never disappear, right?" Chapter 43-41. Are you sure? Romanka questioned. Although I also believe that the main personality won't disappear, there's always a chance. Although there's a chance, once it happens, it'll be an irreversible outcome. Alice was stunned and became even more nervous. Then what should we do now? Gong Fan suggested, "Why don't you hypnotize me and I'll go to that world too?" No. Romanka said, "You're already in that world. Even without hypnosis, you'll still go to that world when you fall asleep. However, if you're hypnotized frequently, your mental strength will decline greatly." Gong Fan insisted, "If I can't hypnotize you repeatedly, then I'll try to fall asleep myself. Is that feasible?" When Romanka heard this, he encouraged him and said, "Try it." Gong Fan nodded, lay on the chair and closed his eyes. However, the stronger person's goal was, the more active the surface of the brain was. Therefore, it was harder for him to fall asleep. Gong Fan couldn't fall asleep no matter what and couldn't help but feel anxious. He tossed and turned, but his consciousness became clearer and clearer. Romanka saw that he was forcing himself and sighed. If you can't fall asleep no matter what, don't force yourself too much. Gong Fan opened his eyes, which were bloodshot. I'm worried about him." Alice asked, "Do you still remember where you were before you woke up?" "I think I was on an island." "An island?" Alice was a little puzzled. "Do you still remember what was on the island?" "Let me think." Gong Fan pursed his lips and thought hard, trying to recall the scene before he woke up. "I think there was a very beautiful manor." "Manor?" "Yes, but there were other things outside the manor. However, I usually only stayed in the manor and didn't go anywhere." "Are you alone?" Romanka perked up. "Did you see anyone else?" "No. I'm alone. The island is located on a sea and there's a port. I don't know what's outside the manor. I've never walked out of the manor." "I see. Oh, I remember. There was a car." Gong Fan frowned. "I remember that I tried to open the car door and drive out, but the car seemed to be locked. I couldn't find the key, so I didn't bother about it after that." In his memory, even though there was no butler, no servants, and no maids in the manor, everything seemed to be in order and was taken care of very delicately. The manor was filled with Chinese roses. This was Yun Shirshir's favorite flower. It seemed to have been projected into the dream world. When Alice was at a loss, Romanka suddenly asked, "Are you hungry?" Gong Fan was stunned. "Hungry, I'm a little hungry." "Eat something." Then, Gong Fan was puzzled by his calmness. "What about you?" "At the moment, I don't have any good ideas. I can only wait for you to fall asleep. Then wait and see. Waiting here won't change anything." Alice originally wanted to say something, but after thinking about it, she couldn't think of any feasible way. She could only eat first. Chapter 43-42. After dinner, they rested for a while. Then, Alice dragged Gong Fan to play tennis for a while. Previously, when Gong Fan was recuperating on Ashland Island, Whenever Alice came to the island, she would play tennis with him for half a day. Firstly, she wanted him to exercise and train his body. Secondly, she wanted him to find some hobbies and interests. Unexpectedly, Gong Fan really fell in love with tennis. At that time, Alice was not around every day. When she was not around, Gong Fan would let Lisa play tennis with him. Now, Gong Fan knew that Alice dragged him to play tennis because she wanted him to use up his excess energy so that he could fall asleep faster later. Gong Jie and Lisa were also there. Alice could not take it anymore. She had been in the laboratory for a long time and had not exercised for such a long time. Hence, after a few rounds, she was already panting from exhaustion. When Gong Jie saw the two of them playing tennis, he became interested. Coincidentally, Alice was taking a break. Hence, he took the tennis racket from Alice and asked if Gong Fan wanted to take a break. However, Gong Fan said, "Just don't be a disappointment like Alice." When Gong Jie heard that his nephew had put up a banner for him, he was instantly filled with the desire to win. "All right, when the time comes, let's see who's the real loser." Gong Jie waved his racket and started playing with Gong Fan. Don't say that. Gong Jie had really underestimated this nephew of his. In his impression, Gong Fan, who was also known as Yu Yu, did not have a good physique. However, on Ashland Island, Gong Fan's physique had improved tremendously. Fortunately, Gong Jie was also good at sports. Otherwise, he might not be Gong Fan's match. However, in terms of tennis skills, Gong Jie relied on the strength of an adult and his height of 1.9 meters to suppress Gong Fan to a certain extent. After the tennis match, except for Gong Jie, everyone was exhausted. Gong Fan did not leave the stage the entire time. He was forcing himself to use up all his excess energy. This way, he would have a certain amount of excess energy when it came to sleeping at night. However, although this move was crude and brainless, it had a certain effect. At night, Gong Fan took a shower before lying down on the bed. The moment his head touched the pillow, he fell asleep not long after. After entering the dream, he looked around and realized that he had returned to the manor. He had fallen asleep. However, even if he were to fall asleep, the boy would probably not wake up any time soon. That was because his body was too tired from overexertion. However, Romanka had said that Yu Yu had come to his dimension. Even though he could not differentiate between dimensions, nor could he accurately understand them, he could vaguely sense that he might be able to find Yu Yu in this dream. This way, even if he could not send Yu Yu back to the real world, he could still do his best to protect Yu Yu. Gong Fan pushed the door open and went to the garage. He found that the car was still there. The car was a Mustang sports car. The door was locked and he needed a key. Gong Fan remembered Romanka's words and went back to the room to search for the key. The manor was huge. However, Gong Fan was very familiar with this place. He went to the living room and rummaged through the cabinets. He found many keys. He identified them carefully and finally found the car key. He went to the garage and successfully opened the car door. Chapter 43-43. Although he was young and did not have a driver's license, it was not difficult to drive. There were not many complicated routes and road plans on the island. In addition, the car was automatic. One step on the accelerator and one step on the brake. He just needed to grasp the direction. Gong Fan got into the car and adjusted it to a suitable seat. He put the car in gear and stepped on the accelerator. He successfully drove the car out of the garage and away from the manor. Outside the manor, there was a long asphalt road. There were no cars on it. Gong Fan drove slowly along the road. There were some mountains on the island, but the mountain roads were not narrow. It was not difficult to drive. As Gong Fan drove, he looked out of the window. Unknowingly, he drove to a cliff. It was a dead end. Gong Fan sighed and had no choice but to turn the car around. The gauge showed that there was not much fuel left. There was no navigation here, so he could only activate the fuel-saving mode and step on the accelerator carefully, searching for a gas station along the way. After driving for about 7 to 8 kilometers, he finally saw a gas station. He parked the car and got out, but he did not find any staff at the gas station. The huge gas station was empty. There was no one there. Therefore, he filled up the gas himself until the dashboard showed that the gas level was full. He drove in the opposite direction of the dead end and the manor. There was no one on the huge island. It only gave off an inexplicable feeling of desolation. The sky unknowingly darkened. Usually, He only stayed in the manor and did not go anywhere. He did not expect the island to be so big. After driving for so long, he did not see anything beyond the mountains. Now that the sky was gradually darkening, Gong Fan felt that it was too dangerous to drive in the dark. Moreover, he did not find anything. Therefore, he thought that he should turn back and wait until after tonight. However, when he turned back, because the sky was dark, there were suddenly dots of light in the distance that attracted his attention. Gong Fan slowed down the car and looked out of the window. He saw that the place where the lights were lit up was actually a few taller buildings. There was a huge Red Cross sign hanging on the roof. It seemed to be a hospital? Hospital? Gong Fan frowned. It was still not too late. Therefore, he took the opportunity to drive in the direction of the hospital. Although the hospital was close by from afar, the road on the island was very long. However, the roads on the island were winding and they wasted a lot of time on the way. By the time they arrived at the hospital, it was already late at night. He parked the car a little further away from the hospital and walked to the entrance of the hospital. However, he saw that only a few rows of the hospital were lit. The rest of the rooms were dark. Is there anyone in the hospital? How was that possible? Alice said that the dimension he was in was an XY dimension, and anyone who appeared in it was use other personalities. Could it be that there were other personalities in the hospital? If that was the case, could it be that the dangerous personality that attacked Yun Shusha that day was also there? Gong Fan instantly raised his guard, lightened his footsteps, and sneaked into the hospital. The lights in the main hall of the hospital were not on, but the corridor was lit with dim yellow lights. It was unknown whether it was because of the lack of maintenance, but the light bulb was sometimes on and sometimes not, and the light was very bright. Chapter 43-44. At a glance, he felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. It was terrifying. Gong Fan stood in the hall in a daze, but he did not dare to speak. He gently took a step forward. When his shoes landed on the ground, they would echo in the air. He did not dare to take the elevator, but other than the elevator, it seemed that he could only walk up the stairs. He did not know why he wanted to go upstairs, but he vaguely had an intuition that was calling out to him. It was as if something was attracting him. He did not know if this intuition was good or bad. Gong Fan breathed repeatedly. He did not know if he should walk up. He lightened his footsteps and quietly walked to the entrance of the corridor. However, he was a little hesitant. He did not know what was waiting for him. Of course, Gong Fan's rationality told him that this was not a horror movie. There would not be any ghosts or gods. At the thought of this, he felt a little relieved. Even if it was ghosts or gods, he was not afraid. What was there to be afraid of? Gong Fan mustered his courage and went upstairs. Putting aside the flashing lights and shadows, there was nothing particularly scary along the way. He did not know where to go, so he simply followed the corridor all the way up. At the same time, he could also figure out how tall the building was. He didn't know how long he had been climbing. The long corridor was one floor after another, but there was no indication of the floor. He couldn't remember how many floors he had climbed until he saw a tightly shut door at the end of the stairs. Gong Fan hesitated for a moment, but he still climbed up and tried to push the door. He did not expect the door to be unlocked and could be pushed open. After twitching for a long time, he carefully pushed the door open a crack. First, he looked through the crack. Outside the door was a very large rooftop. From his angle, he seemed to be able to see a drying rack on the rooftop. On the rack were white coats and white bed sheets. There were many living rooftops like this in the hospital. Some doctors and nurses who lived in the dormitory would dry their washed work clothes and bed sheets here. However, other than that, he did not see anyone else. Gong Fan pushed the door open and walked out. The wind on the rooftop was very strong. In addition to the night wind was a little cold. He first walked around the edge of the rooftop. Standing on the rooftop, he could see the general layout of the hospital more clearly. There were a total of 3 rows of buildings arranged in a C shape, with a large garden in the middle. The building he was in was the southernmost building at the edge. Directly opposite was another building. He silently counted the number of floors on the opposite side because he did not know how many floors there were in this building. As he counted, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a strange shadow from the corner of his eyes. Only the middle rows of the building across the street were lit up. In the middle, which was probably the 4th floor, the lights were on. A shadow emerged from the far left and strode along the corridor. Gong Fan was shocked. He wasn't afraid, but he was very surprised that there was someone in the hospital. Moreover, judging from the shadow, it seemed to be a tall and strong man. Although he was far away and couldn't see his body clearly, under the light, the shadow was elongated. Based on the shadow, Gong Fan felt that his height should be more than 1.8 meters. Just as Gong Fan was secretly observing the man suddenly stopped in his tracks. Chapter 43-45. Under the moonlight, for some reason, a layer of fear shrouded Gong Fan's heart. Gong Fan subconsciously took half a step back and had an ominous premonition. At this moment, the man leaned against the window and looked in the direction of the rooftop where Gong Fan was. At this moment, Gong Fan was already on his guard and hid behind the drying rack. On the drying rack, the bed sheets were draped over the rack and stretched on the ground, just enough to cover his figure. Gong Fan didn't know what he was afraid of. It was just that subconsciously, he didn't want this man to find out. This was his subconscious reaction. However, when he turned his head and looked at the moonlight in the sky, his heart suddenly jumped. In his nervousness, he had forgotten that even if these white bed sheets could cover his figure, under the moonlight, they would cast his shadow. Gong Fan's breathing was almost suffocating. He could vaguely feel that if that man's gaze was really looking in his direction, then he might have already been discovered. With the intention of probing, Gong Fan turned slightly. Through the bed sheets that were fluttering in the night wind, he saw from the corner of his eye that the man was really looking in his direction. Two pairs of eyes, separated by not too far, met in mid-air. He could even feel the man's sharp gaze. This man was tall, and one look and one could tell that he was an extremely powerful man. Gong Fan recalled the time when Yun Shirsher was stabbed and immediately equated this man with that dangerous personality. Oh no! Gong Fan instantly felt his scalp go numb. Since he had already been discovered, then there was no need for him to stick to hiding. He walked out from behind the bedsheets and saw that the man's eyes had regained focus and locked onto him. Following that, his shoulders were slightly arched, like a tiger waiting for an opportunity to hunt. The scene was at daggers drawn. If it wasn't for the distance between them, Gong Fan would even think that this man would pounce on him like a cheetah in the next second. His back was already covered in cold sweat. Gong Fan moved his feet slightly and slowly moved towards the door. The man looked at where he was. Then, as he watched him, he quickly ran in his direction through the corridor. He knew where he was and was about to start his hunt. Run. At this moment, there was only one word in Gong Fan's mind. His intuition told him that this man was very dangerous, so he pounced toward the door almost at the same time. Walking down from the rooftop, it was the 10th floor. The man was on the 4th floor. There was some distance between them, but the figure of the man flying in his direction still made him feel a lingering fear. If she didn't run away now, the man would definitely catch up. After all, he was a grown man, so he couldn't be slow. Run. But where could he run to? Gong Fan didn't have time to consider the man's identity. He only wanted to find a place to hide. As he ran in the huge hospital, the echoes of his footsteps made him feel as if someone was hot on his heels. This made him even more worried. Gong Fan groped through the doors one by one. Every door was either locked or a dead end. There was no place to hide at all. He didn't dare to place his hopes on the thin latch. He always felt that no matter how sturdy the lock looked, the door wouldn't be able to withstand a man's kick. Chapter 43-46. Gong Fan didn't know what to do and couldn't find a place to hide. He first ran down to the 9th floor and then turned back to the 10th floor. Just as he reached the 10th floor, he vaguely heard footsteps running upstairs. Gong Fan approached the window warily. He first stuck his head out and looked up. At this moment, the footsteps upstairs had quietened down. He first glanced to the left, then to the right. Then, on the upper right, he saw a person's head sticking out of the window as well. That man had actually run to the floor he was originally on at such a fast speed. The man was obviously not stupid. Through the sound of footsteps, he caught the message that he was on the 10th floor. He looked down and their gazes met again. Gong Fan instantly felt his hair stand on end. The man quickly retracted his head and footsteps sounded. Gong Fan suddenly realized that the man must be running in his direction. He was going crazy. Left or right? Gong Fan judged that the man would definitely come down from the stairs closest to him on the right. Hence, he ran towards the stairs on the left. Following the stairs, He went all the way down to the 4th floor. When he could no longer hear the flustered heartbeat, he calmed down slightly. He was like a headless fly the whole way, fleeing randomly in the hospital building. Gong Fan had never been in such a sorry state. But he knew in his heart. Alice had also told him that this was not an ordinary dream. He had already entered the world of his personality. If he was hurt here, in the real world, his personality would disappear without a trace. He was different from Yu Yu. Yu Yu would not die, but he would. Gong Fan had always remembered Alice's words and was determined to protect himself. He couldn't die. Even if he died, he had to perish together with those dangerous personalities. Gong Fan walked cautiously along the ward. At this moment, the doors were like cages that locked up scourges and ferocious beasts. No one knew what kind of dangerous thing would rush out of the door in the next second. He was cautious, and his footsteps were extremely light. He didn't know if that man had learned from him and slowed down his footsteps, waiting for an opportunity to sneak up on him. Now, he felt like he was the prey in the open, while that man was lurking in the dark, ready to make a move. Unknowingly, the cold sweat on Gong Fan's back had already been dried by the night wind. Following that, another layer of sweat seeped out. His clothes stuck tightly to his back. This sticky feeling was so real that he couldn't even tell if this was a dream or reality. Just as he was walking slowly, he saw that not far from him, the door suddenly creaked open slowly. He was like a frightened cat, jumping back a step, his face full of vigilance. He was so brave, and in the face of all this, he was already calm enough. However, right now, he didn't dare to summon up the courage to ask, "Who is it?" He tried his best to shrink his body into a ball so that he could retreat at any time if there was any danger coming out of the door. Just then, a pair of small hands grabbed the doorframe, and a small head slowly popped out. Under the moonlight, that delicate and pretty little face became clearer and clearer. When Gong Fan saw the familiar face, his heartbeat quickened. Chapter 43-47. When he saw him, he was first shocked and his body subconsciously retreated. Then the child who looked exactly like him called out tentatively, Is it you? Gong Fan?" Hearing this familiar voice, Gong Fan felt a chill all over his body. However, it was not out of fear, but out of excitement. He immediately replied, "It's me." This child finally heaved a sigh of relief and beamed. His watery eyes gave him endless warmth. "It's me, Yu Yu." Then, he hooked his finger at him and gestured, "Come over quickly." Gong Fan could not hide his excitement, but he still tried his best to suppress the sound of his excited footsteps. He leaned against the wall and walked over. When he was 10 feet away from the door, Yu Yu immediately leaned out, grabbed his arm, and pulled him into the room. The door closed softly. Yu Yu carefully locked the door from the inside, trying not to make any sound. Just as he locked the door and turned around, Gong Fan could not hold back his excitement and hugged him tightly. "Yu Yu, I've finally found you." It was not that Gong Fan was not touched, because he knew very well who Yu Yu had entered this personality world for. In fact, he did not have to take such a risk. To him, although his life was not in danger in such a dangerous world, the mental stress was not a small blow. However, Yu Yu had entered this world without hesitation for him and to protect him. Gong Fan hugged him so tightly as if he wanted to integrate him into his bones and blood. Yu Yu did not break free. Instead, he sighed and hugged him tightly as well. "It's good that you're fine." These few words warmed Gong Fan's heart. The depression that he had felt for a long time was instantly swept away. However, this personality of his seemed to be born with undeveloped tear ducts. At this moment, logically speaking, the two of them should hug each other and cry bitterly. But he did not. He was so emotional that he could not cry. "You're fine too. That's great." Yu Yu let go of him and sized him up deeply. Gong Fan was also sizing him up at the same time. The two children looked exactly the same, even more so than Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen. They were practically the same. Yu Yu looked at Gong Fan as if she was looking into a mirror. Gong Fan looked at Yu Yu and was filled with emotions. In a certain parallel world, the two personalities met in such a miraculous manner. This world was really too incredible. Here, Yu Yu saw another version of himself. This feeling was very strange. He then asked curiously, "Why are you here?" Gong Fan hesitated for a moment and explained, "I heard from Alice and Romanka that you were hypnotized for me and that you were supposed to be with me." However, I woke up halfway and took over your body. You couldn't return to your original world. I finally fell asleep and successfully entered the dream world. I found this hospital. I didn't expect you to be here too. This was probably the so-called telepathy. Gong Fan could finally understand why something seemed to be calling him when he first entered the hospital. He could not hear anything, but in his consciousness, it was as if someone was reminding him to enter this hospital. Chapter 43-48. Before you could speak, Gong Fan reminded him cautiously, "Just now, a man chased after me. I don't know who he is, but my instincts tell me that he will do something to me." When Yu heard this, his expression changed instantly. A man? Is he very tall? Is he a little? Gong Fan followed his words and said, "Murderous aura?" Yes. Yes, it's him. This time Yu was certain. He's in this hospital. Previously, I was chased by him too. I feel that he might be the dangerous personality who attacked Mommy. Oh. Gong Fan actually had the same suspicions, but when he heard Yu's doubts, he couldn't help but want to hear his analysis. What do you think? He's tall and strong. I'm guessing that he's a dangerous personality. Compared to you, he's more capable of attacking Mommy. Gong Fan pondered and nodded. He turned around silently, only to see a girl sitting on the bed. He was so shocked that he took half a step back and asked warily, Who is she? She should be another personality. Yu said, "Her name is Shan. Shan? Gong Fan observed her carefully. Shan was leaning against the headboard. Ever since Yu came to this room, she had been in this position and had never changed. Just based on her appearance, Shan seemed to resemble Yun Shirshir. However, Gong Fan knew in his heart that Shan was definitely not Yun Shirshir. However, he also suspected that because she had been with Yun Shirshir for a long time, she had subtly influenced Yun Shirshir's prototype and split into such a similar personality. Shan had an aura that was very similar to Yun Shirshir. So much so that Gong Fan even thought that Shan must be Yun Shirshir's childhood. She has been here since I entered this room, but she doesn't seem to have a dangerous personality. Gong Fan frowned. Even though Yu had said so, he still lowered his voice and reminded him, "Even so, you still have to be careful. In this place, even if it's me, don't trust anyone easily, understand?" He remembered that he had once dreamt of a child who looked exactly like him and Yu. He was a very dangerous person. He could no longer tell if it was a real person or just a dream. Yu looked at him in surprise, but she knew that Gong Fan said that to protect her. "Don't worry. I know what to do." Gong Fan asked curiously, "You've never gone out since you came here?" Yu nodded and said, "I haven't gone out since I came here because I don't know what's going on outside. However, when I was in this room, I heard footsteps coming and going from outside the door several times. I suspect that man hasn't left. I think he must be looking for me." Gong Fan nodded and said, "I'm sure that he hasn't left. He must be looking for you." Then, what should we do now? Yu thought that since they had found Gong Fan, they had to find a way to explore this world. However, even though there were two of them, they were alone. In the face of an unknown world, he didn't dare to make a decision recklessly. If they went out of this door and encountered any danger, Gong Fan might be doomed eternally. Chapter 43-49. If we don't go out and take a look, there won't be any progress. Gong Fan took a deep breath and sighed helplessly. Now that things have come to this, there's nothing we can do. We can only take one step at a time and be more vigilant. Yu still had his concerns. "Let's not talk about you first. Both of us together, are we a match for that man?" Gong Fan was silent for a while. Then he said seriously, "Don't worry, I'll protect you at all costs." Yu stared at him blankly for a while and couldn't help but smile coldly. "What kind of joke are you making? After all, you're the one who should be protected, right?" Gong Fan was shocked. Yu said that he would protect him? Shouldn't Yu be the one who should be protected the most? "I'll be fine, don't worry." Yu was worried that Shan would hear him. Even though he didn't dislike this girl, he still had his guard up. "I'm the main personality. No matter what happens here, I won't be in any danger in the real world. But you're different. If you die here, then in the real world, you will disappear forever. As Yu Yu spoke, he couldn't help but get agitated. He took a step forward and held his shoulders tightly. He said anxiously, "I don't want you to disappear." Gong Fan was silent. Suddenly, a voice came from behind. "Are you going out?" The two little lads turned their heads and saw that Shan Shan had silently appeared beside them like a ghost. "Are you hiding from that man?" "You know him." Yu Yu turned pale with fright. He couldn't help but feel surprised. When Shan Shan mentioned that man, her expression changed. She was obviously afraid. That man is very scary. I'm also afraid of him, so I'm hiding here and don't dare to go anywhere." Yu Yu saw that Shan Shan seemed to have understood something and immediately asked, "Who is he?" However, the truth disappointed him. Shan Shan shook her head helplessly. "I don't know him. I don't know where he came from, what he does, and what his identity is. It's just that he has an inexplicable murderous aura. I don't dare to go near him. He's patrolling here every day, just like the Reaper. He's so powerful. I don't know if he'll hurt me, so I've been afraid to go out." Yu Yu's mind suddenly. Who was this man? Could it be the Reaper that Roman had been talking about? However, logically speaking, shouldn't he or Gong Fan be the one to assume the role of the Reaper? There were too many unknowns in this world. However, if you want to leave this place, I know of a secret passage that can lead you out of this hospital. You don't have to go through the main entrance. You can take the narrow path in the back garden. That's the back door of the hospital. It's never locked. His interest was piqued when he heard this. "Do you know where it is?" When Shan Shan heard this, her originally bright eyes actually dimmed all of a sudden. "Why? Of's that BB? Leave?" Yu Yu questioned. "Haven't you always been here?" Chapter 4350. Shan Shan leaned against the wall and sat down. She hugged her knees and looked disappointed. "I'm alone. I feel lonely and uneasy." Yu Yu's heart softened when he saw how helpless she was. Gong Fan tugged at his wrist. Yu Yu knew that he was reminding him not to trust anyone easily. Yu Yu held his hand instead. "Let's bring her along." "Oh?" Gong Fan was a little shocked by his risk. Yu Yu looked at Shan Shan and turned around. "I feel that she might be of some help to us. Moreover, it's fine if it's that man just now. But she's such a weak girl. Are you still afraid?" "Girl? Weak and boneless?" Gong Fan couldn't help but laugh. "Yu, you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't judge whether a person is a threat to you based on their appearance. Similarly, we need to take risks in life. If we didn't have any sense of adventure, you and I wouldn't have come here." Yu Yu's words were painstakingly unraveling and slowly prying open his heart. "All right." He sighed and only said these two words. Then, he turned around and didn't say anything else. Yu Yu said to Shan Shan, "Can you really bring us out of here?" Shan Shan stood up excitedly. Her face was full of hope. "Are you really willing to bring me out of here?" We can't leave you here alone, right?" Shan Shan walked to the door like a nimble butterfly. "Come with me." Yu Yu and Gong Fan looked at each other. Although they were skeptical, they decided to take the risk. Shan Shan opened the door. They didn't know how she did it, but she opened the door silently. She stuck her head out and looked around. Seeing that there was no one, she came back to her senses and waved at Yu Yu and Gong Fan. The three of them sneaked out of the room quietly. Shoo! After taking a few steps, Shan Shan suddenly shushed them, indicating for them to keep quiet. Yu Yu immediately became alert. "What's wrong?" "I heard footsteps." Shan Shan's hearing was extremely sensitive. Before Yu Yu and Gong Fan could hear anything, she carefully arched her body. Yu Yu did not dare to make a sound. Together with Gong Fan, they held their breaths and looked around vigilantly. "Upstairs." Shan Shan suddenly pointed upstairs and gave Yu Yu a look. "I think he's upstairs. Why didn't I hear any footsteps?" "It's probably on a very high floor. You can't hear it, but I can. He's walking from the left to the right." Shan Shan's voice was not soft. She had asked Yu Yu and Gong Fan to keep quiet so that she could detect the man's movements through their voices. Yu Yu felt his hair stand on end. "It's fine. Let's go this way." Shan Shan pointed in the direction of a door. "Where is that?" Yu Yu was still worried about her. However, Shanshan was extremely sensitive. She could tell that he did not trust her. Are you suspecting me? Yu saw that his thoughts had been seen through. He did not insist on explaining himself. Instead, he pursed his lips awkwardly. Chapter 43:51. After Shanshan finished speaking, she ignored Gongfan's worried expression and walked towards the laundry room. Yu grabbed Gongfan's hand and immediately followed her cautiously. He sighed in his heart and was also skeptical. He did not hear any movement, but Shanshan could actually hear footsteps a few floors away. This was too mysterious. Shanshan obviously saw through his doubts and said with a smile, "My hearing is very good. Perhaps it's because I've been in such a quiet environment that I've developed such good hearing. Not to mention the sounds in the corridor, even outside the hospital, as long as you step on the lawn and the sound of the wind blowing, I can hear it clearly." Gongfan heard this but did not think much of it. "So, you know how I got into the hospital? You've been to the rooftop, right?" Shanshan said with a smile. Gongfan was even more shocked. She actually heard it. One had to know that the rooftop and the room she was in were so many floors apart. Yu also said, "Previously, Shanshan also heard your footsteps. She could tell that the man's footsteps were different from yours. Otherwise, I wouldn't have opened the door because I knew that it must be you outside." The three of them entered the laundry room. There were rows of automatic washing machines in the laundry room, as well as many white bed sheets that were drying. Gongfan looked at the clothes that were drying and asked curiously, "Is there anyone else here?" "Yes, doctors and nurses." Shanshan shook her head. "I haven't seen any doctors or nurses. I've always been here. This seems to be an abandoned hospital. There aren't many people here anymore. You're usually alone in the hospital. Who takes care of you?" "Me. I take care of myself. My sister comes to visit me occasionally." "Sister?" "Shoo." At the mention of her sister, a look of fear finally appeared on Shanshan's face. "My sister is very scary. She's always arrogant and has never been nice to me." When Gongfan heard this, he immediately felt strange. For some reason he actually thought of Yun Na. Could it be that Shanshan's sister was subtly influenced by Yun Na's personality? Shanshan led them to a door and pushed it open. The door was never locked. When the door was opened, there was a Z-shaped staircase that led to the back garden downstairs. "It's here," Shanshan said. "Follow this staircase and you'll reach the back garden. After passing through the back garden, you'll reach the back entrance of the hospital." "What about the door after you walk out?" Gongfan was a little lost. He couldn't tell if his car was parked at the main entrance or the back entrance. His gaze passed through the back garden. The back door seemed to lead to a mountain. "Is that a mountain?" "Yes." "What's on the mountain?" Shanshan shook her head blankly. "I don't know. I've never left this place. I haven't even been to the back garden. But I've always been upstairs, looking at the back garden from the window. I saw a path leading to the back door. Let's go. Let's go to the back of the mountain and take a look." Yu muttered in her heart. There couldn't be any wild beasts on this mountain, right? The three of them went all the way down the stairs until they reached the first floor. They plunged into the back garden. The back garden was a large and dense garden with greenery, flowers, grass, stone carvings. Chapter 43:52. The three of them were extremely cautious. Yu had an ominous feeling. He felt as if someone was watching him closely from behind, but he didn't dare to turn around. He felt that if he turned around and met that person's gaze, "I feel as if someone is watching us from behind." "You feel it too?" Gongfan was about to turn around when Yu tugged at his arm. "Don't turn around." "Why?" "I feel that something is wrong. If we don't turn around, that person seems to be looking for us and watching us closely from behind. But if we turn around and try to run away, he will chase after us relentlessly." Gongfan was stunned. Indeed, he felt that way too. "If we pretend that we don't see him, he won't chase after us?" Yu nodded. "Theoretically, yes." "Shoo, stop talking." Shanshan was a little scared. "I feel scared." "Don't be scared, we're still here." They walked through the back garden and saw an iron door at the end of the winding path. Yu finally heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the iron door. "We can leave the hospital from here, right?" "Yes." He took a step forward and opened the door before Shanshan did. Yu stepped out of the door, but for some reason, his vision blurred for a moment, and what he saw was yet another empty ward. It was as if the door was a terrifying enchantment. He thought that he could leave the hospital after walking out of the door, but after going around in circles, he was back in the hospital again. Ah! Yu opened his eyes abruptly and struggled to wake up from the bed. The nightmarish dream was tearing his brain apart. As far as his eyes could see, all he could see were concerned faces. Alice, Gong Jia, Lisa, Hua Jin, Natalia. They were all here. However, Yu was so scared that he shrunk his shoulders. He didn't know why, but the two worlds kept switching back and forth. He couldn't even tell if he was still in the dream or had already walked out of it. What's going on? Yu held his head and rubbed his temples in pain. He was a little confused. Where am I? Who am I? His personality kept colliding with the door in his body, and he was a little lost. No one in the room said a word. It was so quiet that it was as if they were frozen. It was a strange scene. They were very worried, but Romanka had repeatedly reminded them that Yu was awake. No matter how worried they couldn't say a word. Otherwise, it would disturb Yu's consciousness. Romanka was standing beside Yu. He was so quiet that it was as if he didn't exist. Yu didn't notice his presence. Hence, he took the opportunity to bring a bottle of smoke to the tip of Yu's nose. The smoke rose in spirals. Yu unknowingly took a big breath. The cool and refreshing smoke traveled along his nose. It was as if the cool and refreshing chill had gushed into his swollen temples and calmed his chaotic heartbeat. He closed his eyes and greedily sucked in another big mouthful. Only then did the restless feeling of waking up from the nightmare slowly disappear. Romanka finally spoke. Chapter 43-53. This is not a dream. No matter what happened in the dream, calm down and take a deep breath. Yu followed his footsteps and breathed slowly. After repeating the cycle many times, his eyes finally cleared up and were no longer cloudy. The messy voices of those personalities in his mind finally subsided. Yu opened his eyes. When Alice saw that he had regained his composure, she suppressed her worry and said tentatively, Yu, you're fine now. She guessed that he had a nightmare. She was so worried that she wanted to ask him a lot of questions. For example, she wanted to ask him, do you feel better or are you not feeling well? However, Romanka had said that if Yu had woken up, he must have experienced a lot of dangerous things. If he woke up, his mind would be in a mess. If she asked him a few more questions, he might not be able to react. He might even get anxious and angry. Since Yu had woken up, it meant that he was fine. However, at this time, it was better for him to maintain a clear mind and not ask too many questions. This was the best way for him. Alice could only tell him one thing clearly. He was awake. Moreover, this was the real world. Even with these few key words, Yu had to slow down for a long time before he could understand the current situation. He was too tired. Experiencing those things in the dream was much more tiring than experiencing them in the real world. Often, many people would have such a feeling. A truly comfortable sleep was a dreamless sleep. After falling asleep, there would be no dreams. Instead, one would sleep until the sun rose and wake up naturally. When one opened their eyes, even the air was very fresh. If one fell asleep and started to dream, it might be better if it was a good dream. However, if it was a nightmare-related dream, one would feel as if something was stuck in their throat when they woke up. Not only would it be difficult to breathe, but even their head would feel heavy and uncomfortable. Even their breathing would be very turbid. The more a person dreamed, the more they would have trouble sleeping. Yu had experienced a series of things. Although he seemed to be sleeping, in reality, his brain was still very active in his dreams. When he woke up, he would inevitably feel a little dazed. Therefore, this also proved why dual personality disorder and multiple personality disorder consumed a lot of mental energy. The so-called mental power was because not only was the patient active in the real world, but when the patient was sleeping, the other personalities would be active in the dream, and these personalities would switch back and forth. Gradually, the body would only become a vessel that carried the personality. What was a container? It was these personalities that gradually broke away from their bodies and competed with each other for the vessel. Even if they got along well with each other, the repeated stripping and re-entering was like entering an environment of minus 30 degrees Celsius all of a sudden and then entering a hot day of 40 degrees Celsius. If this happened too frequently, the body would eventually collapse. In Alice's eyes, Yu Yu's willpower was extremely strong. In addition, the two personalities had been getting along well, so that kind of situation wouldn't happen. But it was foreseeable that Yu Yu's body wouldn't be able to handle it if she didn't make some adjustments soon. Chapter 43-54. That was because her face was no longer expressive. Her body had become a vessel. Her personalities were alternating back and forth, killing each other and giving birth to new ones. Her expression could no longer keep up with the frequency of her personality switching. For some reason, Alice's heart ached. Perhaps she was worried that Yu Yu would end up like this. After Yu Yu woke up, Romanka gently massaged his temples and let him lie on the bed. After closing his eyes for a while, Yu Yu finally became more awake. When he regained consciousness, he suddenly became anxious. How could this be? He looked around anxiously, as if he was very anxious. Romanka saw his anxious look and frowned. What's the matter? When Yu Yu saw him, he nervously grabbed his sleeve. Did you wake me up? Ah! Romanka looked innocent. He shook his head and said, You woke up on your own. No one woke you up. How could I have woken up? Yu Yu was a little anxious. When he thought of the scene in his dream where he, Gong Fan, and Shan Shan had escaped to the back garden and found the exit with great difficulty, they had just opened the door and returned to the ward. He couldn't help but break out in cold sweat. He didn't know if this was a dream or a messy scene when he was about to wake up. He was a little irrational. You can't come back, Yu Yu mumbled. Why should I come back? Romanka saw that he was anxious to return to the dream, and knew that Yu Yu and Gong Fan had encountered some danger in the dream. Why not? Do you have anything that you're confused about? Tell me. Maybe I'll find a way for you. Yu Yu looked at him suspiciously. He didn't know if he should believe him now. Alice encouraged him. Yu Yu, tell Professor Romanka if you have anything. He'll help you. Right now, other than Romanka, there seemed to be no one who could help him. I clearly remember this dream that I had. Hearing this, Romanka knew that Yu Yu was willing to talk. He was not anxious to continue listening. Instead, he picked up the sketchpad and said to Yu Yu, Actually, this is not a dream. It is a dimension created by your brain. To be precise, it is the hometown of your personality. The people you meet there are all personalities in your body. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. The hospital is huge, but there doesn't seem to be anyone here. There aren't any doctors or nurses. Yu Yu explained quietly. Romanka asked, What's a hospital like? I stayed in the ward the whole time, so I didn't observe. However, there was a garden behind the hospital. Gong Fan said, The hospital is actually bigger than I thought. There are a total of 3 rows. It's a C-shaped structure with a courtyard in the middle. The highest floor. According to the information provided by Yu Yu, Romanka drew a rough picture of the hospital and handed it to Yu Yu. Yu Yu nodded. Yes, that's right. What did you see? I saw a girl. A girl? Yes. Yu Yu said with lingering fear. Yes. Do you still remember what she looked like? Yes, Alice immediately said. Yu Yu can draw. If you can draw it, it might be more intuitive. Chapter 43-55. Yu Yu took the drawing board and picked up the charcoal pencil. First, he casually sketched a few lines on the sketchpad. Romanka was surprised to find that his casual sketching skills were not worse than a master-level sketch. Some people say that people with multiple personalities are born crazy artists. Many people with multiple personalities like to draw. Perhaps this has something to do with their delicate and sensitive feelings? Alice agreed and said, Without a delicate heart, how can one become an artist? Many times, when people think of artists, they think of lunatics. It's not that they're lunatics. It's just that they have stronger and more persistent willpower than ordinary people, and there's room for imagination. Then the few of them remained silent, leaving Yu Yu some peace and quiet. Yu Yu held the charcoal pencil and drew quietly. Because it was a sketch, he quickly sketched out Shan Shan's appearance. Gong Jie and Alice were surprised when they saw it. Romanka might not be able to recognize it because he had never interacted with Yun Shirshir, but Alice and Gong Jie were very familiar with it. This was probably how Yun Shirshir looked when she was a young girl. My sister must have looked like this when she was in her teens. Alice also nodded. Why? Do you know this person?
Romanka saw their strange expressions and could not help but ask.
"What's going on?" Alice asked doubtfully. This girl, not only her facial features, but also her demeanor, are exactly the same as Yu Yu's mother.
"Oh."
Romanka nodded and took the drawing board from Yu Yu's hand.
He said bluntly, "I've read the dossier.
According to my analysis, the scene of his mother being bullied when he was young must have been stuck in the depths of his mind. Therefore, the origin of his personality is probably based on his mother when she was young. That is to say, when he was young, those nightmarish experiences couldn't be forgotten. That's why such a situation occurred." After a pause, he turned his head and asked, "Besides Gong Fan and this girl, did you see anyone else?" Alice clenched her fists nervously. She did not want Yu Yu to tell anyone else.
However, Yu Yu said calmly, "I also saw a man."
"A man?" "Yes, he's very tall, 8 meters. He chased me before."
"Chase?" "I remember that when I was conscious and paced around the hospital, this man had been following me silently. At first, I saw a black shadow and thought it was Gong Fan. When I got closer, I realized that this man was very tall and slender.
Gong Fan also met him on the rooftop.
He said that this man seemed to have a murderous aura." "Killing intent?"
"I don't think this man is that simple. I couldn't tell if it was dangerous or not, but it didn't give me a good feeling. He seems to be looking for us." "You think he's looking for you? Then what do you think his goal is, to find you and chase you?" Yu Yu was a little confused. "How can I know what he's thinking? But he gave me a strange feeling. I can't tell if he has good intentions or bad intentions. Anyway, we've been avoiding him." "Before you woke up, do you remember where you were?" Chapter 43-56. As Yu Yu spoke, he felt a headache coming on. He rubbed his temples and looked at Romanka with a perplexed expression.
"What should I do?"
"Rest for a while. Come out for dinner later. You should be hungry." Yu Yu nodded. He covered himself with a blanket and lay on the bed. Lisa stayed behind to take care of him. The rest of them left the room. Romanka and Alice walked to the corridor. Their expressions were complicated. Romanka looked at Alice but did not say anything. "Professor, what do you think of Yu Yu's current situation?" "Actually, Yu Yu was forced into this world by the outside world. I gathered all the personalities together. According to the information provided by Yu Yu, there is a girl named Shan Shan. She is 15 or 16 years old. Her personality is similar to his mother, Yun Shirshir. She is gentle but tenacious. There is a mysterious man. His appearance is unknown. He is 8 meters tall. His origin is unknown. There is also a girl named Ran Ran. I heard from Shan Shan, but she has not appeared yet. I don't know if she really exists in the world of the personalities. Currently, the known personalities, including Gong Fan, are these. So what should we do next?" Alice felt sorry for Yu Yu. "Professor, let's be frank. I agree with your treatment plan. So far, this treatment plan is the least harmful to Yu Yu. However, his mental state doesn't seem to be optimistic. Should we continue with this?" Romanka turned around and looked at her deeply. He raised his eyebrows disapprovingly. "What else can we do? If we don't continue with this treatment, will the treatment be stopped?"
"My heart aches for him."
Alice frowned, especially when she thought of Yu Yu's frightening expression when he woke up. It was as if he had just escaped from a nightmare. Now, he had to enter the same dream again and again. Romanka sighed. "What else can we do? You need to know that Yu Yu's current situation is not looking good. Plus, you need to treat her conservatively. This means that the adverse effects of conservative treatment will last for a long time. Of course, you can rest assured that I will pay attention to his situation at all times. If the situation is not optimistic, I will not enforce this plan." "All right." Alice was at her wit's end. Other than the treatment plan planned by Professor Romanka, she really couldn't come up with any other plans. When Yu Yu woke up, it was a sunny day. Compared to the gloomy days in the other world, the warm sunshine in the real world made him yearn for it. After dinner, he suggested that he wanted to go out for a walk. Lisa said that she wanted to accompany him, but Yu Yu said that he wanted to have a quiet walk by himself. Lisa could not let him be alone, so she followed behind him from afar. Just as Yu Yu left, Hua Jin received a video call from Yun Shirshir. Yun Shirshir's wound was slowly healing. As the wound was very deep, she was still unable to get out of bed and walk around freely. In the video call, she was still wearing the hospital gown. However, under Mu Yaja's meticulous care, she looked much better.
Where's Yu?
Chapter 4357. When Yun Shirshir heard this, she asked tentatively, "Is he okay?"
Hua Jin was a little hesitant.
"I'm not sure about Yu's condition because I don't know much about this. Professor Romanka has come up with a plan for Yu. If it goes according to the plan, there shouldn't be any problems."
Oh, I see.
Yun Shirshir was obviously relieved. She pleaded again, "Hua Jin, when I'm not around, you have to take good care of Yu. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep well. You're the one I trust the most. You know how to take care of people. Don't worry, I'll take good care of Yu and Natalia." Hua Jin promised again. Yun Shirshir was relieved. "If Yu comes back, tell him that I'll go over to accompany him after I've recovered."
Okay, I won't forget.
After hanging up the phone, Hua Jin looked a little worried. Yu's condition wasn't very optimistic. This was what Romanka had said. However, at this point, he could only comfort Yun Shirshir. Otherwise, if she heard that Yu's condition wasn't optimistic, she would definitely rush over anxiously. Given her condition, her wound hadn't healed yet. It must be too much for her. Now, he could only comfort her for the time being. They could talk about the rest after she recovered. On the beach. Yu sat on the beach. The waves came over layer by layer. Unknowingly, his toes were covered with fine sand. Lisa stared at him for a while. Finally, she walked over slowly and carefully sat down a few meters away from him. Yu knew that she was secretly protecting him. He smiled and said without turning his head, "Aren't you going to sit closer? Didn't you say that you wanted to take a quiet walk by yourself?" "I only said that I wanted to walk around in peace. I didn't say that I just wanted to sit alone in peace." Lisa blushed when she heard that. Hence, she moved closer to him. Yu stared fixedly at the distant horizon and blurted out, "This planet has an area of 360 million square kilometers, which makes up 71.8% of Earth's surface area. The sea seemed endless, but in reality, it was just a thin layer of blue clothing covering the surface of the Earth. Earth was not the largest planet in terms of size. It was just a part of the solar system. The solar system was so big, but compared to the Milky Way it was nothing. The Milky Way is all-encompassing, but beyond the Milky Way, there are too many places that humans dare not imagine." Lisa was confused when she heard Yu's words. She did not understand what Yu was trying to say. Yu turned to look at her and smiled. "Actually, in the second you breathe, a few lives are lost. Life forms are too small compared to the whole world."
Yeah.
So, if humans want to evolve or even surpass nature, they have to evolve. Looking at the history of human evolution, the survival of the fittest. The only ones left are the strong ones. Actually, humans don't have fangs, claws, or the sensitive sense of smell and hearing of dogs. They also don't have the eyesight of an eagle. But humans rely on their super-strong brains to stand at the top of the food chain on this planet.
Yeah.
Chapter 4358. Yu smirked. "To me, the human brain is the scariest thing on this planet. Based on what we know, the structure of the brain is the Milky Way. In fact, the potential of the brain is not as simple as the Milky Way. Do you know that sometimes you can't even control your own brain to think about something? Humans can't even control themselves. They can't be like other creatures and do whatever they want. For example, when you're sad, you don't want to think about sad things, but you can't help but think about it. Don't you think that's a scary thing? Don't think too much." Lisa knew what he was worried about. Yu laughed helplessly. He stood up and patted the sand off his butt. "Get up, let's go back. Will the sun hurt if we don't continue to bask in the sun? If we bask in the sun for too long, we'll get sunburned." Lisa got up and followed Yu back to the medical center. When Professor Romanka saw that he had returned, he immediately summoned him alone. Yu followed him to the medical room. Seeing that Alice was not around, he asked in a low voice, "What are the chances of Gong Fan's personality and mine fusing?" "Very high."
How high is very high?
"There's no accurate data on this. If there's no accident, the two of you can definitely fuse. After all, you're willing to accept him and he's willing to accept you. There's no problem with the fusion.
Yu was silent for a while.
What do you mean by accident?
Didn't I say that if he dies in the dream, he'll disappear forever?
Why would he disappear?
Yu was not convinced.
He's a personality that I created. Why would he disappear? If I didn't allow him to disappear, would he disappear?
The personality was controlled by the brain.
If he couldn't even control his own brain, Yu would definitely feel indignant.
Romanka glanced at him.
Do you know why people suffer from depression? Because people can't control their nerves at all. There were thousands and thousands of sensors in a human sensory system.
Even if there was a mistake in the most important part, there was no way for the human body to repair it.
He could no longer be naturally happy or naturally sad. Even sleeping normally had become his biggest problem. Actually, why don't you think about it?
Is the person controlling the brain, or is the brain controlling the body?
What you mean is that humans are just parasites that live in this body and accept the control of the brain. I didn't say that.
Romanka carried Yu to the monitoring chair and put on a brain imaging helmet for him.
Man is neither a parasite nor a god who controls the brain.
Just like how humans will never be able to dominate the world.
Why? Haven't humans already dominated this world? If the world you're talking about refers to Earth, then I can also break your fallacy. So far, man has not completely conquered nature. Humans have invented so many remarkable technologies, but why can't they prevent natural disasters? Hearing this, Yu was momentarily speechless. He didn't know how to answer this question. Chapter 43:59. Romanka turned on the device and said, "Lie down. I'll monitor the activity of the personality in your brain. If I leave that world, will I still be in the body in that world? I'm not an encyclopedia of multiple personality worlds. I don't know everything. I only know that the main personality won't disappear, but I can't say that I'm 100% sure about this." Romanka continued, "The next time you sleep and enter that world, everything will be revealed. Actually, my suggestion is that before you enter that world, you should first have a full sleep to replenish your mental strength." "No need," Yu said stubbornly. "I'm not tired." Romanka looked at the brain imaging displayed on the screen, but he didn't expose his excuse. Not tired? He was just a child. How long could he last? No one knew. But there was no doubt that his mental state was already very bad. Romanka did not say anything else. After the brain imaging test, Yu could not understand the imaging. He asked curiously, "What should I do the next time I enter that world?"
"I think that the activity on the surface of your brain is still very high. This means that the personality living in your body has not fully emerged. You can explore more in that world while protecting your own safety."
Explore. Yu did not think much of it. That's too risky. The truth always comes with risks. Yu nodded. Okay, I got it. After evening, Yu went to bed early. Romanka had prescribed a lot of medicine for him. When Alice brought it over, Yu looked at the colorful pills in the box with a frown. Obviously, he was not very willing. There's no choice. This one is for calming the nerves. This one is for helping you sleep.
This one is for... Yu pursed his lips.
Okay, don't say any more. I'll just eat them all. That's a good boy.
Alice smiled.
Eat them one by one. They'll help with your absorption. Yu followed Alice's instructions and took the pills one by one. Lying on the bed, Alice came over and said, "Do you want me, this beautiful sister, to tell you a bedtime story?"
No.
Alice was greatly frustrated. Why? Your mommy has repeatedly told me to tell you bedtime stories. I'm not a kid anymore. Tell me the truth. Do you dislike me? Yes. Yu waved her hand. What if I have nightmares when I look at your face?
Alice almost spat out a mouthful of blood.
What? My beautiful face actually gave you nightmares. She was heartbroken. Yu was finally amused by her. Okay, Auntie Alice is the most beautiful, okay? It was rare to hear Yu praise her. Alice was satisfied. She tucked Yu in and said gently, "Sleep early, okay?" She bent down and kissed him gently on the forehead. This is a good night kiss on behalf of your mommy. Good boy. Yu smiled. If Alice becomes a mother in the future,
She'll definitely be a very gentle mother. I'm afraid you won't have the chance.
Chapter 4360.
Entering the dream again, Yu opened his eyes and realized that he was lying in the back seat of the car. Seeing that he was awake, Shan, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, said happily, "He's awake."
Gong Fan was driving.
He glanced through the rearview mirror and saw that Yu was awake.
He relaxed his brows.
Yu sat up and asked curiously, "Where am I?"
"You suddenly fainted just now.
Did you return to the real world?"
"Yes." Yu nodded. "Because a person's sleep time is limited."
"Did anything happen after I woke up?"
"No."
Shan explained. "After you fainted, I was very worried. I didn't know what happened to you, but Gong Fan said that you were too tired and fainted. He carried you and followed the road to find the car. He said that he drove the car to this hospital."
Yu sat up. "Where are we going now?"
"I heard him say that we're going home."
"Home?"
Yu was confused.
"Where are we going?"
"Back to where I was before," Gong Fan explained, and Yu did not ask any further after hearing that. He was surprised to see Gong Fan controlling the steering wheel so easily.
"Do you know how to drive?"
"A little."
"When did you learn? Did Xiao Yichen teach you?"
Gong Fan smiled. "I think this car is no different from a go-kart."
"Oh please."
There was still a huge and obvious difference, okay? However, at such a tense moment, Gong Fan's words made him feel much more relaxed. Gong Fan did not know the road. He did not know how far they had gone. Fortunately, he had filled the car with gas. Hence, he was not afraid of being stranded halfway. After going around in circles, they still returned to the original junction. However, there were only 3 forks in the road. Since he had taken 2 wrong paths, the last one must be the way to the manor. Gong Fan stepped on the accelerator without hesitation. 10 minutes later, the car arrived at the entrance of the manor. Gong Fan parked the car in the garage and the 3 of them got out of the car. When Shan saw such a huge manor, she was stunned.
"What a luxurious manor."
"Gong Fan, is this really your home?"
Yu was also in disbelief.
She never thought that there would be such a luxurious manor in this world.
It was really amazing.
It was as luxurious as a manor in the real world. Yu remembered that she had gone to a winery with Mu Yaja before. It seemed to be a manor like this one.
It was very big.
Just the back garden alone took up 10 acres of land. Gong Fan didn't know how to explain it, just like how Shan couldn't explain why she had been in the same hospital since she was conscious. Ever since he was conscious, he had been living in a manor like this. During normal times, he lived in this manor step by step and did not feel that there was anything wrong with it.
"It's here. Let's go in."
Normally, no one would be able to discover this place. As Gong Fan spoke, he walked to the door. However, he realized that the door was ajar and not closed. He remembered that he had closed the door before he left.
What was going on?
Gong Fan looked around in confusion. For some reason, the sky in this world was always gloomy. The bleak scenery always seemed lifeless. It was no wonder that he was so attached to the sunlight in the real world.
Chapter 4361. This was the place where he used to live.
It was always cloudy and had lost the sunlight for many years. The trees in the back garden were all withered and looked extremely bleak. This seemed to be a scene that could only be seen in the middle of winter.
"What's wrong?"
Yu saw that he was stunned and was a little puzzled.
Gong Fan shook his head. "Nothing. Let's go in."
Yu and Shan followed behind him and walked in. After walking into the manor, Yu realized how luxurious the interior of the manor was. The American-style furniture was made of solid wood, the fireplace, the rocking chair. What was puzzling was that even though Gong Fan lived here alone, no one cleaned the place, but there was no dust.
"It's so clean."
Yu turned around and asked Gong Fan, "Can I take a look around?"
Of course.
Perhaps it was because he was in a safe environment. Yu let down his guard. In addition, he was curious about Gong Fan's residence, so he looked around. Shan was also very interested. Hence, she followed behind Yu and looked around room by room. The manor was very big. There were a total of 3 rows of buildings. The layout was similar to that of the hospital, which was a C-shaped structure. Yu held the stairs and walked up. Looking at the magnificent furnishings, his sighs kept echoing.
"Wow, it's so beautiful."
Look that mural.
This mural is so beautiful too. The voices gradually faded away with the sound of footsteps. Gong Fan went up to the second floor and returned to his room. He was thinking about how he should rest since it was already so late. His room was very big. Gong Fan walked in and wanted to change his clothes first. After carrying Yu Yu all the way, it was inevitable that he was sweating. He was such a clean freak. How could he tolerate it? Hence, he wanted to find a clean set of clothes to change into after taking a shower. However, just as he entered the room, Gong Fan caught a glimpse of the furnishings on the table and couldn't help but frown. It was very strange. There was an ancient bronze ornament of a little angel on the table. He had the habit of tidying it up. Perhaps it was OCD, but he remembered that before he left, the ornament on the table was facing the window. Now that he looked at it again, it was obviously moved silently. It was obvious that someone had casually picked up the ornament, looked at it, and then put it back in its original position. How could this be? Gong Fan immediately became nervous. Could it be that someone had been here? That was impossible. He was the only one living in this manner. Usually, no one would come here, and no one would enter or leave his room. Could it be that someone had come in when he left? Gong Fan looked around warily, trying to find some clues. He walked to the side of the bed, but he didn't find anything strange. However, it was a fact that the ornaments on the table had been moved. Gong Fan had a bad premonition. He turned and looked at the wardrobe.
There was a row of large cloakrooms in his room.
At this moment, that row of wardrobes became his main suspect. He suspected that someone had come in and out of the room. Then, this person wanted to search for something in the room and came to his room. Before he could find anything, he heard the sound of them coming back, so he found a place to hide. Gong Fan's gaze landed on the wardrobe. He clenched his fists and slowly walked over. Chapter 4362. He purposely lightened his footsteps, obviously suspecting that someone was hiding in the cupboard. He was afraid that the sound of his footsteps would alarm that person. Who could it be? If it wasn't for his usual attentiveness, he wouldn't have noticed that someone had entered his room and let his guard down.
Then, who was the person who entered and left the manor?
Gong Fan was suspicious of the large number of cupboard doors, but he obviously noticed that the doors of the cupboard were half closed. This made him even more vigilant. Usually, he had obsessive-compulsive disorder. No matter if it was the drawers or the door, the cupboard or the ornaments, they must all be returned to their original positions. Especially the cupboard doors and the room doors. He didn't like the feeling that there was a gap between the door and the cupboard. That narrow gap always left endless space for one's imagination. One night, when he was about to go to sleep, he realized that the door wasn't closed tightly. Through the gap in the door, he could see the direction of the corridor. He had a feeling that through the gap, there would be a dark shadow groping towards his door. Hence, he always had the habit of locking the door and windows before going to bed. Similarly, he did the same for the cupboard door. Gong Fan's hand gripped the handle of the cupboard door tightly and pulled it open. In the cupboard, there were layers upon layers of clothes, but he didn't find anything strange. Gong Fan's heart was filled with doubts, but he clearly heard hurried footsteps coming from behind him. He turned around abruptly, but before he could see clearly who it was, he was violently pushed to the ground by the black shadow. Before Gong Fan could react, he was pushed to the ground and his neck was tightly gripped by a pair of hands. Cough, 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 cough. That pair of hands were gripped so tightly that he almost couldn't breathe normally. Gong Fan looked at the person who had pounced on him. Even with the back of the light, he could faintly see that this was a youth who was a few years older than him. Because of the back of the light, he couldn't see the youth's face clearly, but he could vaguely see the outline of his facial features. It was so unfamiliar, he had never seen it before. However, such a dangerous aura, such a murderous aura, Gong Fan suddenly thought of a dream, of the youth who chased after him relentlessly. In that dream, that youth didn't look like this. He looked very similar to Yu Yu, but that scarlet gaze, that gaze that clearly wanted to kill him, was exactly the same as the gaze of the youth who had pounced on him now. It's you. Gong Fan made a rare sound. Because his throat was being choked, he was almost suffocating. The blood in his brain flowed backward to the top of his head. The feeling of suffocation made him subconsciously counterattack. He swung his fists at the young man's face, punching him repeatedly. Cough. The youth's grip had obviously increased in strength,
and the feeling of suffocation was like a wave crashing over him, causing him to feel dizzy and disoriented.
Gong Fan's consciousness gradually blurred.
His face flushed red and all the strength in his body seemed to have frozen. There was a huge disparity in physique.
He was obviously no match for him.
No matter how hard he tried to reach out and punch the young man, he felt that his fists didn't hurt or tickle the young man's body.
You. Who are you? Could this also be Yu Yu's dangerous personality? Was he also the one who attacked Yun Shirshir that night? At the thought of this, Gong Fan's heart was filled with rage. Chapter 4363.
He kept coughing and pressed the youth onto the ground.
Before he could punch him, the youth pushed him away, stood up and kicked him. I'll kill you, I'll kill you. The youth used his feet to kick him fiercely.
Even though they were not in the real world, the pain was still so clear and distinct.
Gong Fan subconsciously wanted to protect himself.
He arched his body and dodged, but the youth's eyes were red with anger. He grabbed his collar again and lifted him up with an unknown strength.
At this point, Gong Fan's feet were already in the air. He kicked weakly.
As he was suspended in the air, he did not have any fulcrum to support himself.
The youth lifted him up. What kind of strength was that?
There was no doubt that the person standing in front of him was a very strong opponent.
Gong Fan's hands clasped his throat tightly. Unknowingly, a sentence from Alice appeared in his mind.
If you meet with any accident in that world, in the real world, it would mean the death of your personality.
He could no longer sit still and wait for death. Gong Fan stretched out his leg fiercely and used his last bit of strength to kick his vital part.
The youth groaned in pain and his hands finally let go of him. He staggered backwards and bent his waist. His gaze was even more sinister.
Gong Fan leaned against the wall and was released from his grip. He greedily took in big mouthfuls of air.
Huff, huff, huff. He staggered up from the ground and was determined to fight to the death with this youth in front of him. The youth was about to go forward when he saw the ornament on the table from the corner of his eye.
Hence, he ran towards the table and grabbed the ornament on the table. Holding it tightly in his hands, he turned around and rushed towards Gong Fan. Together with his colleague, he raised the bronze ornament in his hands high up.
The sharpest part of the ornament smashed towards his head.
Gong Fan dodged and retreated. The youth missed and hit the window behind him. The window instantly broke.
At the same time, Yu Yu, who was strolling on the third floor, suddenly heard a sound coming from downstairs and was shocked.
What's going on? He looked at Shan Shan.
Shan Shan could not help but say nervously, I heard it.
It seems like the sound of the window breaking.
Just now, she heard hurried footsteps downstairs, but she thought it was Gong Fan walking around, so she did not care.
Did something happen? Shan Shan shook her head. Yu Yu immediately said, Stay here and don't move. I'll go downstairs and take a look. No, I'll go with you.
This is too dangerous.
Yu Yu reminded her, Stay here and don't move around, okay?
Oh, then you must be careful.
Okay, remember to lock the door after I leave. All right, I got it. Yu Yu turned and left the room.
Shan Shan watched him go downstairs before carefully locking the door.
Yu Yu rushed down the stairs.
At the same time, in the room, Gong Fan and the young man were still in a tense confrontation.
The youth picked up the ornament in his hand and threw it at Gong Fan. Gong Fan wanted to dodge, but he was tripped by the carpet under his feet and fell forward. His forehead hit the corner of the cupboard, and his brain shook violently. Immediately after, he felt a sharp pain and numbness at the corner of his forehead, as if some sticky liquid was flowing out.
He held his forehead, and his vision started to blur.
Chapter 4364. Yu Yu heard the sound and ran to the door.
When he saw the young man closing in on Gong Fan, he immediately shouted, Who are you?
When the young man heard Yu Yu's voice, he turned around abruptly. When he saw that it was Yu Yu, he looked back as if he was trying to identify the person he was looking for. Yu Yu shouted sternly, What on earth are you trying to do? The young man was stunned. Then his face turned gloomy. Yu Yu looked at Gong Fan and saw that he was injured. Just as he was about to go over to him, Gong Fan shouted, Run! Just as Gong Fan finished speaking, the young man pounced on Yu Yu. When Gong Fan saw this, he did not care about his dizziness. He did not know where he got the remaining strength from, but he pounced over and hugged the young man's leg tightly. The young man did not expect him to be so bold. He was caught off guard and tripped on the ground.
The young man turned around with a fierce gaze. "You're courting death." As he spoke, his fists landed on Gong Fan's body like raindrops. When Yu saw this, he was anxious. However, he knew that he was no match for this young man. Hence, he said to the young man, "Be ****, come at me if you dare."
The young man's attention was attracted by Yu and he turned around. At this moment, Gong Fan was already exhausted. His head was dizzy and he fell to the ground weakly. Yu turned around and ran, attracting all the young man's attention. The young man stood up, kicked Gong Fan aside, and chased after Yu. Yu ran up to the 4th floor in one breath. The young man chased after him. He ran extremely fast and caught up with him in a short while. Yu hid in a room and locked the door. He leaned against the door and tried his best to suppress his breathing. He nervously listened to the movements outside. Outside the door, the young man's footsteps slowly passed by. When he passed by the room Yu was hiding in, he paused for a few seconds. When Yu heard this, she couldn't help but hold her breath. She was worried that the young man would break down the door if he found out. He knew in his heart that he was no match for this young man. The youth paused at the door for a while, then slowly walked away. Hearing the footsteps leaving, Yu still did not dare to act rashly. However, he was still worried about Gong Fan downstairs. He did not know how Gong Fan was doing now. Was it important? He saw that his head was covered in blood just now, and he didn't know if it was serious. Yu leaned against the door with his back against it. It was only when the commotion outside seemed to fade away that he made a decision in his heart. Immediately, after opening the door, he rushed towards the room where Gong Fan had collapsed and locked the door from the inside. Yu leaned against the door until he could no longer hear the young man's footsteps. Yu took a deep breath and opened the door. Originally, at this moment, he should have rushed downstairs. However, for some reason, he glanced in the direction of the young man's footsteps. The young man's back was facing him. Yu opened the door very softly. There was almost no movement. However, for some reason, when he looked at the young man seemed to be able to sense his gaze and suddenly turned around. What kind of gaze was that? That was the gaze of a ferocious beast searching for its prey. Yu instantly felt suffocated. He couldn't care less and turned to run. Behind him, the sound of footsteps chased after him. Yu pounced to the staircase, sat on the handrail, and glided down the stairs suavely. Chapter 4365. The youth clenched his fists tightly, and his eyes that were filled with hostility slowly narrowed. Yu came to the room where Gong Fan had collapsed. He walked to the door and saw Gong Fan lying on the ground. He turned pale with fright. First, he closed the door and locked it. Then, he rushed over and carried Gong Fan. Gong Fan. Are you okay? He suddenly felt a sticky mark on his palm. Yu's heart palpitated. He looked at his palm and saw that it was red. He was bleeding. Yu was worried and patted Gong Fan's face gently. Gong Fan, are you okay? Gong Fan. Gong Fan's eyelids fluttered and he finally opened his eyes. When he saw Yu's face, he recognized him as the youth because his vision was blurry. He was nervous and instinctively put up a defensive posture. It's me. Yu revealed his identity. Gong Fan was relieved. It's good that you're okay. Don't worry. How could anything happen to me? How about you? Do you feel better? Yu was extremely worried. The sticky mark on his palm made his heart beat wildly. Nothing must happen to him. What happened? Who is that person? Gong Fan licked his dry lips and said weakly, I don't know. When I returned to my room, he suddenly appeared. Yu frowned. Maybe he sneaked into this manor